All right. Coming at you guys all the way live from the lower bottoms of West Oakland. This is Revolution live stream. And today we have a very special guest. I have Eric Vaughan. He is a filmmaker for the new docuseries that I just peeped called The Con, about the 2008 financial. Do you call it the financial crisis or the housing crisis, or do you call it the financial housing crisis? What do you call it?
Well, you know what? There's actually several crises that are all sort of wrapped up into one, but we'll call it the Great Financial Crisis for just the grand umbrella
of crises. I also put a link on the bottom of the screen to the website, so you can see the trailer, and they can see the first episode on the website as well.
Yes. The first episode is free to the public.
Now, I'm from California, lived in California the majority of my life, but I did actually work in real estate finance during that crisis time. So a lot of things you guys were saying were hitting real close to home. I lost my homes. I lost everything as well in that same crisis. What was, for the people that haven't seen it, what was the impetus for you to go back to that time and tell this story?
Well, I mean, the short answer is that the story was never told right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I think the way that it kind of came about was that so Patrick Lovell, who was the guy that we follow, the protagonist,
mm-hmm. The narrator, if you will, he's the one narrating it, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a friend of mine from way back, and he had lost his home during all this madness, not in the first initial 2008, but it was in the subsequent foreclosure crisis that the economy had already created.
So when Golden West and all those companies had bought those the bank stuff, the IndyMac loans, right?
Oh yeah, all through that period, and so and what became very clear was that the story that was being told from the media, from the government, from anywhere, wasn't matching up with anybody's actual lived experience, right? And it just seemed so odd that we're being told one thing or another, from all the whatever, we'll just say powers that be for the for the shortcut, and it just didn't ring true. Mm-hmm. So the basic genesis of this was to try to get to the bottom of what actually happened, because what we were being told just did not make sense as far as being the reasons, the cause. I mean, they're trying to blame every homeowner as if the woman that we profile in episode 1, especially, but throughout the series. I mean, I'm sorry, but a 91-year-old, widow in a poor part of Akron is not pulling one over on the creme de la creme of the Wall Street, elite. That's just not reality. Mm-hmm. But that's the reality that they tried to shove down our throats, and that just wasn't the case.
There's a book, and I don't know if you guys checked it out at all. It came out last year called Homewreckers, about the same thing, right? A reporter named Aaron Glantz from actually out here in San Francisco wrote this book, really profiling the Wall Street angle. So he really goes after Steve Mnuchin and Donald Trump and Michael Dell and George Soros, all the guys that were really involved in the foreclosure crisis.
Sure.
And of course the housing crisis. But like you guys, what I really enjoyed about what I saw so far is I think you have to have a human element when telling this story, because what gets lost is all of the verbiage in secondary markets and mortgage-backed securities. For a lot of people that aren't in that world, you don't understand how that works. And you don't get the game. And another thing I really loved was you guys had that sit down interview with Obama. And you cut in really interesting clips of that interview, because there's something about the elites in this country, especially on the Democratic side, where Chris Hedges says they have a feel your pain language.
Right.
Like,
right.
I understand Meemaw lost her house, but she should have read the fucking paperwork, because it's not illegal. And it's so frustrating, because I think we projected so much on 2008, right? We were really hoping that this was going to be some way out of what we've been dealing with for so many generations when it comes to presidents, and to sit there and a problem that actually had affected a lot of black people, a lot of brown people, a lot of poor people.
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. It was a crisis for black, brown, and poor people well before it was a crisis for the media, for the rest of the country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the truly aggravating things about this is that, I mean, all the way back in the late 90s, I mean, the appraisers were already, sending warnings up to Congress saying that they were being blackballed if they weren't basically hitting the numbers that the brokers were giving. I mean, that's all the way back in the 90s. I mean, there was already, lights turn, the red blinking lights, going off the hook before the 2000s even started. Mm-hmm. But the problem was that it was all happening in the black, brown, and poor neighborhoods, right? And so it's not a crisis until it hits the suburbs, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of that's one of the biggest travesties. It's like there were so many opportunities to stop this before it became what it was. Mm-hmm. But they just didn't listen, because one, it was affecting the wrong people, and too many people were making too much money.
And again, I haven't seen all 5 parts. Do you guys touch on reverse mortgages at all?
We do. We actually collected a lot of interviews. We have in the can basically what constitutes about 65-70% of what would be a season 2, where we actually do really heavily get into reverse mortgages, because obviously that was a big part of it. I mean, that's the Steve Mnuchin story through and through, and how he ever made it to Treasury Secretary. Everything that he pulled is I mean, I just don't know. I don't know. I mean, it was. You have to call corruption what it is. And that's the thing that I think is like the most painful thing about the, this neoliberal set of Democrats and, of course, the Republicans, is that they won't simply call it corruption. And because that's ultimately what it is. I mean, this is corrupt practices through and through. This is not, people taking out bad loans. This is fraud. This is fraud on the front end. This is fraud on the back end. So whether you're a homeowner who's getting screwed, or whether you're an investor, like a pensioner who's getting screwed on the other end, basically, if you have real money, you're getting screwed. If you're making, if you're the person who's like basically making the money because the decimal sheets on your spreadsheet are going in the right direction, you are making tons of money. Everybody else was, and that's just ultimately that's one of the biggest travesties.
Yeah, in that book, it starts off telling the story of an older couple who, and he kind of really gets into it. They're watching James Garner. Was it Maverick? Was that his character back in the 70s? Was he Maverick?
Yeah. Was that James? Wait, was that James Garner, or was that there's he was the Duracell guy, knock it off whatever. Anyway,
I can't remember who it is. I want to say it's James Garner, but anyway, he was doing it. Alex Trebek is doing. They have those commercials at night, and there's a lot of older people that stay up later and watch television.
Right.
And I forget what show this family would watch, but it was some like crime drama, and these commercials would come on about reverse mortgages. So when a person came by their door talking about reverse mortgages, they were like, "Oh, this is the James Garner deal."
Well, now it's Tom Selleck, isn't it?
I could see that. He's in that age range now.
Isn't he the one who's doing that now? Or it's like,
is it still reverse mortgages, or is it oh yeah, they're still legal.
Oh yeah. It's Tom Selleck is pushing reverse mortgages, where it's really funny because you like watch him on his show Blue Bloods, and he's like, you know, Mr. Strong Voice, but then he's on like these reverse mortgage commercials. And he's like, well, you know, if you want to be
if you want to be financially secure, what you need to do, yeah,
it's like, who you trust are these guys? Like,
and he kind of his story, he goes, he's kind of like, you know, because these are the people that we trusted, because this is like, you know, I've been watching this guy on TV for a gajillion years now. He's my age, going through the same old person problem I have. Why would he be pitching me on something bad? The salesman comes to the door to sell the reverse mortgage, and something that he got into, and I'm glad I'm talking to you, because it's like the one thing that I think a lot of these things miss is that the people originating these loans from the kind of the ground level don't know what they're talking about. It's like car salesmen. Mechanics don't sell cars. Economists don't sell financial tools. Your stockbroker isn't an economist. He's a money salesman. And at the end of the day, these guys are all money salesmen.
Oh yeah, well that's exactly right. I mean, the product that they had was money coming in from Wall Street, and they just needed to find some place to park it. And so, you know, mortgages were like this fantastic place to do so. Mm-hmm. You know, and I think that we're striking upon the other, you know, thing in episode 2. We talked, you know, quite a bit about what great marketers these lenders were. We spotlight AmeriQuest especially.
Wow. Yeah, I remember AmeriQuest.
Yeah, because they had they had fantastic commercials. They really did. I mean, they were great. There's like one of the ones that we show in the episode is the one where the guy's like on his Bluetooth, and he's talking about, you know, somebody doing, you know, something. He says, "You're getting robbed," and then you have like some like old immigrant couple who runs the convenience store, and they end up like, you know, cattle prodding him, and then you know, and then they have like their tagline that comes up after that. You know, I mean, they were fantastic marketers, because that marketing, and, you know, we're talking about, you know, having James Garner or Tom Selleck or
Alex Trebek, you know, insert comfortable face here.
Right. That legitimizes that legitimizes the business, especially for people. I mean, they know who they're picking, they know who they're getting for spokespeople, and they know exactly why. And yeah, I mean, marketing, you can't do this without tremendous marketing to get people to buy into, you know, in other circumstances could be an obvious scam.
And that's where you know, I'm not going to lie. I made a good amount of money in that world, not really understanding what I was doing, because I was 21, 22. And you give any kid a bunch of money, and at the end of the day, everybody's happy. Where I'm from in California, I'm from, you know, an urban inner city environment, right? From a city called Richmond, California. It's near Oakland. And because of this easy ability to get money, we got all this overbidding on houses. So even people in my area were able to sell their $200,000, $300,000 house and get a newer house further out in the suburbs. And we don't really teach people about the value of keeping homes, like home ownership, right? Like, hey, this is a very valuable asset you have here, and maybe you shouldn't soak all the equity out of it and run to the suburbs real quick, because those people sold those homes, they ran to the suburbs, then lost everything.
All right. Well, I mean, but that's the lie machine, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's why you need the marketing, and not only that, but you also need like the economic pundits, out there saying, "Oh, housing's always going to go up; it's never going to go down." And so, I mean, without that myth so pervasively, thrown out there and just embedded in every corner of the housing market.
Mhm.
You wouldn't get these situations where you get into a bad loan under the idea that once it adjusts, you can just refinance it. I mean, that's what they would do. They get these people caught in these traps where they'd have this terrible loan with a teaser rate that they could
1.95.
Whatever the case might be,
Yeah.
right? And then say, well, don't worry. Before it adjusts, call me up. We'll get you into another loan.
Yeah.
And we'll get you all taken care of.
You're going to have enough equity to refi out of this in no time.
Right? Because your home value is going to continue to do this, and so no problem. But you have to have an awful lot of people telling that exact narrative in order to pull this off. And that's the thing that people need to understand is that this was not an accident. This was not a black swan. This was not, a perfect storm. This was something that had to have been, whether it was by action or by reaction to what people were seeing on the ground, engineered. I mean, you can't just do this stuff. That's why it's impossible to say that it was all these, horrible, vicious, homeowners trying to get a house. That was the problem. Because ultimately that wasn't the product. The product was the money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do in the con, is that we follow that line all the way up to where, because like you said, you didn't know what you were doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they come in, they say, hey, we're selling houses and you go and you sell some houses, you can get a huge commission and we'll tell you how to sell it.
Mm-hmm.
And they tell you everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, everything that they're telling you is basically how to get somebody into a loan that they shouldn't be in, but that's exactly the plan. The thing is that very few people on the bottom actually understood the ramifications of what they were doing. But guess who did? That manager, that CEO, way up at the top. They knew exactly what was going on, and they're exactly the ones who never, ever got prosecuted.
Mm-mm.
It was always the small guy.
Yeah, and there was a lot of that, man, because what's real interesting is I feel like, and this is why I think a story like yours is important and why I reached out to you guys. And again, thank you, Eric, for agreeing to come on. Are you in Ohio?
Yeah, Akron.
Okay, so double thank you, because I know it's like 9:00 there. So thank you.
Oh, no problem.
Um,
Lakers, LBJ.
no, I believe that's going to be the show next week. There's been some interesting talk around LeBron James. Very funny.
I'm sure.
That you said that.
My favorite part about, just to make a fun aside,
Yeah.
my favorite part about his interview after winning the championship was calling out Akron. I just thought, we love that.
Oh,
You
know what?
Just
I
love
totally forgot that he's from there. I'm not even trying to be funny. I totally forgot that he's the Ohio guy. I thought y'all were still mad at him for the decision.
Oh, Cleveland, not Akron.
I thought it was the whole state.
And Akron always has LeBron's back.
Well, I should invite you on next week for this LeBron conversation, because it's going to be pretty fucking hilarious.
I'd love to be there for that.
There's, we can have a side, go off on the side a little here. I had a guy on who wrote a book about American exceptionalism, like the myth of it, right? The myth of meritocracy, a guy named Danny Haiphong. Mm-hmm. And he's a journalist and a bit of a sports fan as well. And he's had some interesting basketball players he's interviewed. He interviewed a former Golden State Warrior, David West. Mm-hmm. And David West had a very pro-China stance that I haven't heard an athlete have, that was very nuanced. Like, he had a very good understanding of the politics of China.
Right.
And him and I got into a kind of a short discussion about like Kaepernick and LeBron, and I asked, is LeBron kind of the new Jordan? Is this what the new corporate athlete looks like, where they can pay fealty and gesture for the social movements that are popular, whereas Jordan really couldn't? Remember, he's famous for the line, Republicans buy shoes too, whereas LeBron is kind of the antithesis of that, where he's got the hoodies. There's a lot of performative things with him, but is it real? Is it just what the new corporate athlete looks like? So we were going to get into kind of a in-depth discussion of that.
Well, I mean, without getting too far sidetracked, I do think that there's a couple of sides to him, because I mean, you know, I just want it to be about basketball and about him being from Akron. But you know what? The truth is that he does, cozy up to, J.P. Morgan, Chase. He does cozy up to, all these, different outfits. And yeah, based on the stuff that I've been working on for so long with Patrick and the rest of the team, it's yeah, it takes a little bit of the edge off the adulation. So
we're all complicated individuals.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I look at it. At the end of the day, we're and in Akron, where you are, is where he has his school, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, I promise school. I drive past it every day on my way to the studio.
And it is a public school, from my understanding. It's not a charter school.
Correct.
Everything I've read about the school is pretty amazing, and I applaud everything he's doing. Can that school kind of be the model for the way we look at public schooling? You hope it is, and not just kind of a back pat to a good deed.
Right.
And that's how I look at, a lot of the stuff he does.
Well, I actually do think that the I Promise School is legit, like a good thing through and through, and I think that it's in it for the right reasons. So if I might take points off for like certain other things,
he gets it back. Okay, and now this is my last LeBron question, and I'm sure you'll say no. I'm sure you'll say no. Do we put an asterisk next to the championship?
Maybe an exclamation point. Are you kidding? That's gotta be the best championship ever.
That's so I have a friend who grew up with Dwight Howard, and so I think he might have been like, maybe not staying with him, but they were like in close, they were in contact during the whole bubble thing. And before anybody could say anything, as soon as the championship was over, he's like, "Hey, I'm just letting you guys know, nobody could win a championship in a bubble. Like, that shit was like punishment for those guys. To be stuck in that bubble and to win that championship, don't put an asterisk next to it. They earned it. It's not their fault they played who they played." And I was like, no asterisk then, no asterisk. So I want to show a trailer from the movie, from the website. Let me get this up, because I can do that now. I paid all this money for this application that I can't afford.
It's a nice setup, I have to say.
Hey, like I said. And let's make sure. Can we hear it? Can you hear it?
I'm not hearing it.
Ooh. That's dope, man.
Thanks. It was a long time coming. I mean, we our actual principal photography for the con began, I believe it was spring of 2015.
Okay.
But we had done another piece called Forward 13 that came out before then, that we started putting together in 2011, and that was crazy. That's actually what kind of started the journey, that initial documentary. And when we hit the road for that, it happened to be at the exact same time that the Occupy movement was springing up everywhere.
Ah, okay.
And so we went across the country and we visited like 30 some Occupy encampments in 22 different states. That was.
Did you guys get swept up in the movement as well?
You know what? Yeah. I mean, it was hard not to, especially when you got like such, once again, another situation of the story that you get from the media being different from what we were experiencing going to all these different places. I mean, what really struck me about the Occupy movement was how completely pan ideology it was. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were like, you had everything from the hardest of the hardcore libertarians all the way to, the full blown anarchists. I mean, real anarchists, not like what people,
not the Hot Topic version.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And they were all finding common ground. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing, given this day and age, when we keep on being told that we can't get together, that we're so, separated and we're so whatever. It's like, it's just because we choose to talk about the wrong topics. Because
I agree.
For instance, one of the main reasons why we focused on corruption with the con was because, guess what? I don't care where you are on the ideological spectrum, you don't want corruption.
Thank you.
I mean, it's that plain and simple. And we wanted to be able to talk to as many people as we possibly could, so we didn't care whose agenda we were stepping on. The only thing that we cared about was getting the story right, going and finding the most primary sources that we possibly could and getting them on screen to put together this story so that we can say, hey, okay, you want to know what actually happened? This is what actually happened. And I'm not just saying it because, whatever, I think I'm smart or something like that, and I've done my research on YouTube. It's like, we actually went out to these places. We went to the National Archives. We went to, talk to, the former head of investigations for the FBI during that time period. We went and talked to the former, head of criminal fraud investigations at the Department of Justice during that time. We went to the people and pulled out the documents that actually are germane to everything that happened, and we put together this story. I mean, that's why it took so long. I mean, honestly, but yeah, I mean, it took a long time and a lot of effort and a lot of pain, to put this together. But we did, and I'm really super proud of my producing partners, Adam Bronfman and Patrick Lovell, because, man, if we didn't all have each other, this would never have gotten done, ever.
Well, I'm glad you guys were able to get this done. Good journalism, you have to do a lot of investigating and question asking. And again, I can't stress it enough. It's the human story for me that I think is going to connect with people.
I'm glad that you said it, because that was one of the most important things for us going into it, is that there's been a lot of good documentaries about the financial crisis that have been out there, like Inside Job is like the first one that always comes to mind, but it's very much top down. An Inside Job, they did a really great job talking about how academia fed into everything, right? And that's an important part, of this. But from everything that I saw, nobody was talking about the financial crisis from the perspective of the people that were most heavily victimized.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, wait a second, we have something to say also. And so that's why like Addie's story was so critically important to us, was that she checked off so many of the boxes for the quintessential victim, where this was first happening. She was 90 some years old. She was a widow. She was from a poor community. She was from a minority community. All the different things that were the first targets of these fraud schemes that led to the great financial crisis were first happening in neighborhoods like Addie's. And, and here she is. And I'm sorry, Rick Santelli, it's not that Addie wanted this huge house with like a new bathroom and all this other stuff. She wanted to have, a leaky roof repaired, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many, different ways that so many of these unscrupulous loan brokers would be able to get to the Addies of the world. We have on camera, we actually put together like a series of micro docs that you can see on our website and on our YouTube page, where they're like 3 to 5 minute, mini documentaries where we sort of do a bit of a deep dive into one specific concept, that comes up during the con. And one of the ones that we're actually working on right now, we interviewed Patricia McCoy and Catherine Engel, and they talked about when they were researching how predatory lending and in mortgages was first occurring. What they found out is that there'd be certain, like, say, municipal policies, that were saying that you have to have, it's in the municipal code that you have to have a roof that's up to snuff, or whatever the proper terminology might be. Mm-hmm. And if an inspector came around and saw that your roof needed work, you could be cited for it, and then eventually it would become like a fee or some sort of a tax lien potentially. Mm-hmm. And, you could even lose your home, from something like that. Well, so you go through a poor neighborhood, maybe it's Addie's house, and maybe you're one of these city inspectors, you write this down that she's in violation, she gets a notice, and it gets filed at the city. Well, these brokers would go to the city, go through all these records, and they would find out who was in violation, in what neighborhoods, and then guess what? They would magically appear at their doorstep and say, hey, we notice that there's some problems with your roof. We can get you into a loan so that you have that repaired. So they come down as if they were angels called from heaven, right? And they were the furthest thing from it. That's predatory behavior at its most pure. And once again, you keep on trying to tell me that it's the homeowner that caused a financial crisis. That is just a lie. It's been a lie. It was a lie back in 2008, and it's a lie now. And so it was hyper important for us to tell that.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%. I'm like this. There was a guy. Unfortunately, he passed away a few months ago. His name was Michael Brooks, and he had a saying that was "Be ruthless against institutions and systems. Be good to people." And I think we need to really all echo that sentiment, especially when it comes to situations like these. We need to be ruthless against these institutions, ruthless against these systems, and understand that we're not going to reform this away. To me, this is like police violence, right? This is violence. You can't reform this away. You can't body camera this away. You can't, I'll put a new law here this away. It just sucks. We've commodified a basic human need. And this is what happens when you do that. It's greed on top of greed on top of greed on top of greed, and it gets all the way down. And someone's going to pay for it, right? To a degree, but the people that end up paying for it, definitely aren't the motherfuckers that are the constructors of the system. They never get any. Jamie Dimon doesn't go to jail.
Right.
Who is the other one? Lloyd Blankfein doesn't go to jail. If anything, we give these guys cabinet positions. They get these little bullshit fines.
Yeah, and that's the fines are a super important thing because I mean, like recently, I think it's just recently. I think it is one of the big six, for Wall Street firms. I think it might have been J.P. Morgan Chase. They talk about, they have like this, this big settlement that they had to pay, in order, because of like hiding money laundering or whatever the case might have been in their most recent violation. What they never do is that they never go back and account for how much money they made doing what they did. Because
they just tell you the fine amount.
Right. So it's like, yeah, so if I got like a 90 million, whatever, say I get like a $90 billion fine, settlement. But oh, by the way, I made like 1.2
trillion,
whatever trillion on it. That's not exact. That's not even a slap on the wrist. I mean, it's such an easy metaphor to make it make sense to so many people. It's like if you have this some guy over here who goes and whatever knocks off a convenience store, and gets $1,000 out of it, the police come rushing in and they say, we're going to settle this out. We're going to settle this. You give me $100 and you never do this again. That's not exactly a deterrent. I'm pretty sure that person who just knocked off that convenience store and walked off with $900 is just going to go to the very next convenience store and knock that one off.
Yeah.
Because the system just came in and proved that it was profitable.
And it's interesting that you use that analogy because I think when we think of crime and when we think of like the devastating nature of criminal behavior, we always look at it at a very, very TV show, police story,
right.
Law and Order level of kind of peer-to-peer violence. And when you have these huge systemic problems like a bank pillaging a system, being upheld by your Congress all the way up to your president.
Right.
And when you have people like the woman in your story who could be my grandma, right? Kill herself because she lost her home or was losing her home. And there's so many stories in the United States of people losing their home. Before this pandemic, which you guys are covering, led to, I want to say, was it 10 million homeless after, during the financial crisis? So you have this, to me, an act of violence that's causing people to lose everything. And the big mainstream media narrative, and I'm so glad that you guys had those takes from people like Glenn Beck, who they tried to do an image laundering on because he did some kumbaya thing with that late, I can't think of her name right now, Sandra B or whatever her name is.
Right.
And he's still the odious Glenn Beck that was blaming poor people for being poor and not reading the fine print, if you will. He's still that dude.
All right.
And again, I'm ruthless against these systems, and to me, it should radicalize people when we see these stories of everyday people. Like there's a scene you guys have, and it fucked with me when I watched it, where you have a guy giving his key to somebody for $1,500 because he got foreclosed on. Somebody with money came in and said, I'm here with the company that's taking your shit, clean it up in X amount of days. Those letters happen here in California too. Right. Clean this up in X amount of days, and I'll give you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Dude gave his house up for $1,500 and then went to go sleep in his car.
Right. Right. And then meanwhile, that lending institution or that bank, collected the insurance. Meanwhile, it's like, whatever is going on, with however that loan was bundled, further on down the line, and then ultimately, where do these end up? I mean, you have companies like BlackRock, who basically, like half the houses in the country at this point, it seems. I mean, did you, by any chance, have you read or seen Capital, the Thomas?
Yes.
Okay, so they talk about how the aristocracy basically threw their weight around through real estate, right? And saying that we own all of the actual land, and so we're going to have hereditary title. So that means that this that the wealth of the world is going to stay with this small group of people. Mm-hmm. Well, when we talk about transfer of wealth, what we're talking about is rebuilding an aristocracy. Right? Because we are taking property out of the hands of regular everyday people who've just done nothing but work their entire lives to try to have a piece of something, stole it from them, and now it's now it resides in some hedge fund's portfolio. Right? Oh,
yes.
Where it'll never be recycled again, or if it does, it's going to be in some sort of predatory scheme. We're rebuilding the aristocracy as we sit here and watch, and it's done through really rather basic corruption that's just obscured by crazy esoteric nomenclature, and mystic mathematics, to try to describe, a derivative, something like that, when it's actually really not that complicated. It's a very complicated way to create a very basic function of, we're going to steal something from you by you giving us something of value, and we letting you think that that thing that you bought is actually worth something. I mean, it doesn't get really that. It's not really that complicated. That's basically what all these things are.
I want to bring you back if possible. Is it possible, Eric, that we can do this again?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You want to do it earlier, or are you a night owl?
Oh, I'm good anytime, man.
Would you be down to come back on the sports show?
Absolutely.
Would you be down to come back on a horror movie show?
I actually just finished shooting one, so yeah.
Oh shit! Okay, so you're down for that then?
Oh god, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, is there? I have a link to your movie here, The Con. Is there anything else you want to plug before we go?
So yeah, you can get access to all 5 episodes of The Con through thecon.tv. If you go to our website, if you go to any of our social networking properties, we've worked really hard to not just be something where we're trying to market, our product, but that we're trying to create an actual resource of good information. So, go to thecon.tv, check out our blog posts. They're fantastic. Check out all of our micro docs, because they're fantastic, and they can really help frame, a lot of the stuff that's out there in very simple and easy to understand ways. And, I just urge everybody to, take the bull by the horns and get some actual knowledge, not, knowledge proffered by some crazy, guy on YouTube.
So you're saying the YouTube University way to look at a financial crisis isn't right?
Yeah.
Don't take Joe Rogan's word for it. Is that what you're telling me?
there are credible sources out there, and we worked really hard to get as many as we could in order to tell the story, and for everybody to please take advantage of it. I mean, I didn't make it for me; I made it for you. So
I love it. I love it, man. And also, I do want to add that I found The Con because my YouTube algorithm, some of these algorithms work, went from the Majority Report with Sam Cedar to a panel discussion with like Thomas Frank and oh god,
Jesse Eisinger and
yes,
Cohen,
yes,
Pelletier,
a bunch of heavy hitters.
No,
and then I saw it, and that led me to the con. I was like, what the fuck is the con? I click the con, I watch the trailers, I go to the site, I find the movie on YouTube, I hit you guys up. Wonderful enough to respond. I really appreciate that. I can't express that enough, how much I appreciate you guys getting back to me so quick and being so down to do this. So I'm going to do whatever I can do to help support this film, because I really believe in it.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. And thank you. You have a great show.
All right. Oh, are you? If you do stick around, we're going to have a discussion about racism and heavy music.
Ah, really?
That's what this whole thing started as, a way for me to do something while I wasn't touring.
Nice.
Well, take care, Eric.
All right. You too, man.
All right. Be easy. Peace.
Be well.
All right. I got some new guys to bring in. I'm going to bring in my buddy Paul Kott. He plays guitar in High Tone Son of a Bitch. I'm also going to bring in my buddy who you've seen during the debates, Jonathan Brown. He plays drums in Conan Neutron and His Secret Friends. Coming up shortly, we're going to have another friend of mine, Pascual Romero, that sang in Pathology and played bass in This Moment. And I think he sang after Burden left in Fear Factory. Oh, what else did Pascual do? A bunch of shit. And then also Joshua Kahn Russell is going to be joining us as well. He heads the Wildfire Project. Big time activist and organizer, but came up in the hardcore scene as well. He just confirmed with me a second ago that he's going to jump on this too. So we were supposed to talk about heavy music. Oh, do we lose Jonathan? There he goes.
Oh, I'm back. Had to adjust.
What got our whole conversation started, Paul? What was it that got it started?
Well, I think, this is something that I've thought about a lot, and I know that you and I have talked about before. But I think that it's a combination of different things. I think that I looked at a graph recently that that shows the ages of people who are supporters of Trump, and I was surprised that something like 65% of people who are in their late 40s through early 50s are Trump supporters.
Uh-huh.
And that correlates with advertiser information for like heavy music magazines. Like I think I may have told you, like Decibel magazine, the largest readership is exactly in that age range. And I've noticed that on whether it's Facebook groups or, the comment section of heavy music publications and websites, I've just noticed there's a lot of toxic shit out there, and it's one of those things, like there always has been some element of just sort of like, sort of nihilistic or, misanthropic kind of attitude in heavy music. And that's one thing, but you've just got this context where, people that you just never would have fucking expected seem to have just like flipped a screw. You've got Rob Miller from Amoebics, an anarcho-punk band, like one of the leading fucking, this like seminal fucking band in that genre, who's just gone full on fucking Holocaust denier, and he's just like, he's lost his shit, and it's disturbingly common. So I think like one of the things that I've thought a lot about is the way that people who play heavy music and like to listen to stuff that's just disturbing sometimes, will allow themselves to kind of like say, hey, I like a lot of stuff. I don't want to keep politics in music. Haven't really considered what the consequences of that are. Like if you just really don't give a shit, what ends up happening is you can create a context for acceptance, and it's one of those things. It's like I think about like how how many people I knew told me in 2001, after 9/11 happened, that I should watch Loose Change. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's fucking Alex Jones, man. And but it's true. Like it was a really, I still have friends of mine who all say, well, they'll agree that like, it's true, science maybe exists, but then I'm like, yeah, all this shit kind of started with fucking the fucking Loose Change thing. And they're like, well, there's probably, I think there's truth to that. There's this like residual, unwillingness to kind of, I don't know. So I think it's one of those things that can be as simple or as complicated as we want to make it. You know what I mean? But there, I think, from people who are playing this kind of music to make it, to decide, like what they want to represent, and not be surprised if people who aren't within our community decide, because of lack of action from within, that they want to shut down tours and shows. Like that, I've heard a lot of like, people who have been really upset by like Antifa, for example. You're talking to me the other day about the Behemoth dude, and stuff like that. And so his thing is just this sort of nativism and sort of like really borderline kind of he doesn't think that he's a fascist because he's not a Nazi, but he's a fucking super hardcore fucking Polish nationalist who has all kinds of authoritarian tendencies and stuff like that. And so, people seem shocked when people who are anti-fascists, who are from other communities, who aren't some white European guy, are like freaked out by what he's advocating, And I mean, that shouldn't really be a shock. If you're not willing to police yourself from within, then probably, don't be surprised if people are going to do it from without. That's sort of my point of view about it. Yeah.
And John, who's got a Paul, are you not wearing headphones?
No, I'm just listening to speakers. Is it feeding back or something?
Yes. Yeah, it's loud.
I got a headset on. Is it me?
Nah, that's Paul. Paul's in the studio.
Is that better?
That's why it sounds so good, because he's in the studio with the big studio speakers.
Is that better?
Yeah.
All right.
So John, we did a whole episode on the podcast.
Yes.
About kind of race and heavy music. For those that never heard that episode, what was the, when I sent the call out for you and asked if you wanted to be on this show, what was the thing that made you go, I got some shit to say?
Remember, it was like shortly after after Minneapolis. Yeah. And I've always had stuff to say, but who'd listen? Until you came along. Like that part in Goodfellas where the cops are, the woman's giving the cops all the stolen cigarettes, and he's like, I'd complain, but who'd listen? It's like I can connect anything to a movie scene. Anyway, I think it's always been a thing, because at least in our genre or genres, I'm more from the noise rock world, and not a lot of us, right? So, no. I mean, and not even just
real quick before you finish. I'm going to let you finish. Do you think the more obscure the genre you get, maybe the wider it gets? Because you're in some, me and you are in some weird waters.
I though, Though.
We got the
I don't
wokest
know.
white people in our genre, but it's still some weird waters.
I feel like if like when I like playing just regular just rock and roll, you're probably still not gonna see a lot of us. But I feel between, I mean, and this is all the bands that I've seen, so it's probably what 1%, 0.01%.
Yeah,
Of all the so
yeah.
So keeping that in mind, or the bands that I know of, how about that?
Mm-hmm.
It's all white. It's just all white. I don't know if there's any parsing. I mean, I would say, sure. I mean, if you're gonna take how many non-whites are in noise rock versus how many non-whites are in in hardcore,
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna be playing with small numbers either way. Either way. But I will say this. Like I was saying, I think it's something that as a black person, playing quote unquote non-black music, it's just always a part of it. So I always have things to say, but like I said before, I certainly could have things to say, but who's going to listen, or who really cares to listen? And I think what happened after George Floyd in Minneapolis, a lot of people wanted to listen. Maybe a lot of people were more receptive to listen. But it always seems like like we talked about in that episode, when these incidents happen, there's always that wave of, I want to know more. What's on right now? Yeah. Ooh, wow. Let me look at this thing on the internet. And it just goes away until the next thing pops up. And, and then recently, obviously more recently, we had Jacob Blake. And it all came up again.
That's right in your backyard, kind of, sort of.
In fact, we had Secret Friends practice in Kenosha, 15 blocks away. I left to come back to Madison.
Fuck, dude.
No less than a half hour before that happened. So on my way home, because it takes me about an hour and a half from Madison to Kenosha, and so I wasn't that far out of Milwaukee. I was maybe 20 minutes outside of Milwaukee, and people were already like hitting me. Are you still in Kenosha? My wife, are you still in Kenosha? I heard a black man got shot.
She's like, I'm trying to make sure it's not you. I know there's 7 in the state.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, that's 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 any time I walk out the door, though. I mean, my wife worries. I mean, and rightfully so. When I'd have band practice or whatever band I was in, because you never know if, like for me, if it's going to be my turn. I do think that, and it's a lot easier with COVID. I don't leave unless I got to go to the store or whatever. But I've certainly had my, at times where I've been followed. I've been, I haven't necessarily been pulled over in a while, but I certainly have been followed. Certainly been driving down a divided like boulevard, like later at night. Cop drives by, turns around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only one out there, because it's later at night and I'm driving home from band practice. Yeah, I've certainly had that happen plenty of times.
And do you feel like your band members don't have to deal with half of that shit?
You just went over the percentages, right? Yeah. No,
we don't. I don't know what's wrong with
probably.
Jonathan. He's always so late to practice. I don't know.
Probably not. But speaking of which, I'll give you a story. Interesting story. I was in. I'll just say, just to keep people nameless. In one of the bands I was in the last 10 years. So that narrows it down to about 12 bands, 12 to 15. We were on our way to a show, kind of southwest from here. And we were going through the state of Iowa. And we got pulled over. And the person who was driving was being, let's just say he was being a dick about he was speeding. I mean, it wasn't, he was speeding,
Mm-hmm.
and he was but the, my bandmate that was driving the car was being a dick about it. And I was sitting in the front seat and the bass player was sitting in the back. And so we were 3-piece at that time. And all I could think of was, please calm down. I'm thinking in my mind, like, just chill out. Maybe he'll just give you a warning. It's just a ticket, and he was getting more and more agitated over getting this ticket. And the trooper that pulled us over wasn't being anything. I mean, he was being pretty bland, actually. And all I could think of the whole time was, if anything happens, who do you think they're going to single out? Who's going to be the person in this situation that gets the added scrutiny? And luckily, the trooper just kind of took it in stride, and he gave him a ticket. And maybe he wouldn't have given him a ticket. Driver wouldn't have been, wouldn't have been such a dick about it. But either way, I mean, after we pulled away, and it took about a few miles down the road, so it was pretty quiet, and he's still kind of seething about it. And the person in the back, was like, "Why did you do that? Why didn't you just take it? JB's sitting here." and on first blush, if you didn't know, you'd think, well, why is he, but at the same time, he was right. And I was feeling it the whole time, like, dude, it was a perfect example of privilege. A good example of what if I were driving and acted like that? Which to me, I would never act like that. I can't act like that. There's no way I would be like, yes, sir, officer, sir. I'd be saying sir so many times.
Oh, yeah. They were ready to fuck me up in New York, trying to get to fucking Todd Weinstock's house from Glassjaw. We're trying to get to his house after a show. Pulled over at the wrong spot. The cop came out and I said, thank you, officer. We're lost. That motherfucker said, put your hands up. I was like, whoa. Welcome, Pascual Romero. What's up, man? Pascual.
Hey.
Paul. John.
Howdy, dude.
We still got one more person coming. Joshua Kahn Russell's coming from the Wildfire Project, and you might know him from the Michael Brooks Show. He came up in the hardcore scene in the East Coast. He definitely has some opinions on hardcore and heavy music. Me and John were just bitching about black people shit with Paul. So Pascual, Paul, Eddie Van Halen passed away. Some people don't care. Like what's his name? Stills, was it Crosby or Stills? Which one?
It was David Crosby. Yeah.
David Crosby was like, eh.
Yeah.
He said, meh.
Well, I was saddened by it. I've designed guitars to look like Eddie Van Halen's guitar. I just dig the dude. I dig a lot of the early stuff and even some of the Hagar stuff. But in one of the Facebook groups I'm in, they have been, I wouldn't say make a big deal about it, but they've been kind of talking about Eddie's part Indonesian heritage.
Yeah.
Right.
Which no one talks about. I remember I was having a conversation with Boots Riley, and we were talking about black people. We were actually having this discussion, and he said if you asked any white kid who their favorite guitarist is, if they say who their favorite guitarist of color is, they'll probably say like Jimi Hendrix. They're never going to say Kurt Hammett.
Yeah.
Right.
That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, like Eddie Van Halen's story of moving to the United States was, I mean, it was a story that a lot of people who are first generation who moved here would be familiar with. I mean, it wasn't fucking pleasant, you know, like he was treated like shit, you know? So, you know, yeah. And it is interesting that the way that he's identified today is as this white guy, you know, but that's not really his story or the truth completely. And it's kind of interesting to think about, like, I mean, I don't think he was shy necessarily about talking about it, but it's interesting to think about to what degree LA sort of made him sort of homogenize himself a little bit, you know?
Would you guys say the same thing about Slash?
Yeah, that's true too. You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, the guy was like forced to put his hair in his face on purpose because, you know, they didn't want people to see what he looked like, you know? Yeah. I mean, that's sort of sold as like, oh, you know, he was ugly, you know? Mm-hmm. But I mean, I don't know that was entirely really all that there was. I mean, we think about fucking, you know, 1 in a Million lyrics, you know?
Was that the song?
Yeah, there's probably fucking more to the story than just the fact that they didn't think he was attractive, you know?
And that's interesting because you look at Slash and Lenny Kravitz have the same racial makeup, right? Exact same. Yeah. Black mom, Jewish father. Why is one a black rocker and the other is this, as you put it, homogenized tan guitar player? Pascual?
I mean, I think you could say that there's like an aesthetic thing to that. I mean, Kravitz is a good-looking dude, but I kind of, in my optics, I really think like you also have to look at like what world they're in, and when you're looking at like hair metal, hair rock in the 80s. You're looking at a real white boy's world, you know, and
yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
You know, like being a mixed Hispanic person and it like my whiteness was generally played up in most, you know, not on purpose, but like, I just was kind of in with the white guys, you know, it wasn't like my identity was part of it. So, but to go back to Slash, like, I think that's probably why it was kind of washed out a little. Like I think it was that Kravitz came, you know, I mean, thinking back to like his real peak, like there was this little renaissance there where you had like, you know, Living Colour became like a really huge band. And then you had like Kravitz was like the new, you know, Hendrix, not that he truly was, but just that he was the one that reminded everyone, like right as that early 90s kind of 60s revival was sort of kicking off, and he really fit that role well, you know. And so I think that it may not have been like it really, I think, had more to do with just like what kind of universe they were coming from. You know, you had Slash in that whole 80s Sunset Strip thing, but then you had Kravitz coming up in this sort of like slightly more woke, slightly more like culturally relevant, you know, music renaissance that was trying to happen at that point.
Let Love Rule years, that Beatles revival thing.
Exactly.
Does anyone remember Lenny Kravitz before he was Lenny Kravitz, when he was Romeo Blue?
I do not.
I don't know if it wants to.
That's for deep cuts. I'm a deep cuts guy.
I mean, but people knew that Lenny Kravitz's mom was Roxy Roker, so people knew he was black. And at least that's how I feel about it. Nobody knew who Slash was. I mean, until, all of a sudden this dude with aviator shades and a big giant top hat, that could really play guitar. I mean, and like you said, in the heavy metal scene, I mean, until Living Colour came around, really, and then maybe even King's X to some extent,
Sure.
Nobody, black people playing heavy music. I mean, and Hendrix was just a mere memory.
Right.
Because Hendrix played as heavy, especially at his time, if not heavier than almost anybody.
Do we look at guys like Hendrix, though? And I ask this question to all of you. Do we look at guys like Hendrix and even guys like Bad Brains? Do we look at them as people that have kind of transcended their color into this other thing? Like Michael Jackson, until all the shit came out about him and towards the end of his career.
It's tough for me because he was just, I don't know, Michael's black. His whole family's black. All of them black.
Black ass Jackson.
Grew up listening to him.
But
I know what you're saying. But it's
it's like that scene in Do the Right Thing where Spike Lee's asking John Turturro, or not John Turturro, I forget the guy's name. Like, it is John Turturro. Yeah. Who's your favorite? Yeah. Who's your favorite actor? Who's your favorite this guy? Who's your favorite this guy? Who's your favorite this guy? I kind of feel like there's certain people, Hendrix being one of them.
Yeah.
I
agree.
And I think that early incarnation of the Bad Brains where they kind of stay 27 years old forever. Right?
Yeah. It's kind of another thing that's sort of interesting about Bad Brains when you think about it is that they as a band were like super Christian, and then they became like, Rastafarian guys later. Like the band in DC, like they were really into the Bible and like, they were just fucking weird, but they were like undeniable. But the context was built for that. Like hardcore was more, I mean, people were questioning things, and I think that's one of the things that's like, dude, I grew up when we were 13. I grew up in the Midwest. Like my parents moved around. I was born in Detroit, lived in Illinois, North Carolina, and then we moved to Maine when I was 13. Mm-hmm. And like everybody in that town was into metal, It's like Iron Maiden tapestries and fucking, everybody was listening to fucking death metal and wearing puffy fucking shoes and sweatpants and no shirt and fucking plastic player, fucking cinder blocks out in the yard with a fucking Chevy Nova on it, And so like shit like that going on, like it was 97% white in that state, And I mean, that was sort of the identifying culture in a lot of these like post-industrial fucking, Rust Belt areas, it's like hard rock and heavy metal, and it was very it was very unforgiving. Those were the dudes. I mean, I was into punk rock back then, and I was part of the reason that I liked some of the music, the metal music, but like those are the dudes that would kick my ass, like that. Those were the guys who, like, one dude I remember pulled up to me. He's like, "Hey, you faggot!" And he had on a fucking t-shirt with a picture of Poison with full makeup on. It's like I was just like, "You got to be kidding me, dude!" So like I mean, come on,
And you, okay, and you, so you grew up in the Midwest and the East Coast too, right, Paul?
Yeah. I mean, we lived in Springfield in Illinois and as well, which is another like, I mean, it was, I mean, the stuff that happens in our country in general, like the legacy that we have to deal with in general is present in all those things. But I think what has been particularly striking is that even in the context of like heavy music. Like it's one thing to like be like, yeah, man, this fucking like hard rock, heavy metal is like white boy fucking music, because it's true. It largely is true, you know. But what's interesting is that genres where there's been more of a expression of a desire for more diversity, like punk rock or hardcore, are still white as fuck, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, that's kind of like why I guess, and what could we do to make it a more inclusive environment? You know what I mean? Like
now here's where I'm not gonna necessarily answer that question, because I don't think I have the answer to it. But Pascual grew up in New Mexico, and what was your scene like? Was it a little more diverse in your scene? Was it a little more brown in your scene?
Yeah, I mean, where I'm from, I mean, it's majority Hispanic and Native. So white is it was the minority growing up, especially in the neighborhood I grew up in. In fact, there were no white kids. I was the white kid, right? So it was a little different. I mean, there is a deep Hispanic and Native scene for metal in the Southwest. And in other parts like Canada and stuff, there's a little bit of that too, and like Alaska and stuff. But yeah, so for us, it was a little different. Although once I started doing music for a living, and I was out in LA, it certainly became very clear that it was quite a bit of white boys club. You know, I kind of, when I got to LA, I kind of went through a few different phases of metal, that was like from new metal to metalcore, and those are really heavily white dominated genres. I think you get into like thrash and death metal and you get a little more diversity. But even still, I mean, death metal is by no means a diverse place. You know, it's like you've got like Suffocation and, you know, a handful of other, yeah, and there are a bunch of Hispanic people, but again, like they don't really like talk about being Hispanic, you know, like Tom Araya doesn't talk about the fact that he's freaking Chilean, you know, and, you know, people just sort of like their identity sort of fades into the woodwork when they can kind of, you know, pass for not what they are, you know, and even people like Kirk Hammett. I mean, it's like that dude. I mean, you look at him, you can tell he's ethnically mixed, but it's like, you know, nobody even questioned it though. I mean, he looks like a straight up, like almost more like a Hispanic dude, you know, and it's like, but yeah, it's just like it kind of, your identity sort of gets wiped away when you're in that scene, unless it's like blatantly obvious that you're something, you know?
That's interesting, because I feel like, and I'll keep saying this until somebody proves me wrong, heavy music is the last safe space for straight white dudes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty true. It's like, you know, there's a ton of bands out there that are like, their whole thing is like, that's music to like fucking pump iron with your fucking bros to, and fucking hate your girlfriend.
But don't you think, but that's interesting, but don't you think even that world's shrinking somewhat? I mean, at least
I hope
as
so.
far as it's definitely with the negative parts, with everything with Burger Records over this year. Definitely in Madison, there was a minor shakeup because we had some people here associated with Burger Records bands. You know, that just the complete, you know.
Do you want to let people in on the Burger
Yeah.
Records thing? Because I'm in the dark about.
Oh,
Burger
you don't?
Records.
No. Well, you know,
It's
it's
like
from
a
your
garage rock label that
from your neck of
with
from
the
the
sex
Bay
abuse
Area.
scandal.
They had a sex abuse scandal. I did a Burger Records festival. It was called
Burger Boogaloo, probably.
Burger.
That's what it's called.
Yeah, and I
wasn't
mean,
the label
broke
wasn't the
the
label
fucking
not
label.
associated with it? Like after, like they
No,
just
it was all
gave the
Burger
name?
Records bands.
Oh,
It was all Burger Records bands. A bunch of them, not all of them. But the headliner that year I worked, it was like Devo, I think.
It started off, the festival started with Burger, and then it sort of spun off into its own corporation, I think. But basically, like, when all the shit kind of came down, that was sort of the thing, is the people who did the festival were like, we're totally not those guys. We just know them.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And it's then eventually it's like, that's not going to fly. So they had to. That's fucking not going to happen anymore. You know.
That festival, it's small for the festivals that I was doing for the company, but it's a crazy moneymaker, and it was one of the wider ones I've ever been to.
Yeah. I believe it.
You know, it's funny though, man. I mean, when you think
it.
about festivals, dude. So like, here's a fucking story. So like Colossus did in 2006 at South by Southwest. We played the Vice party. So Vice had this like Vice Kills Texas party that's like, it was during South by Southwest, but it was free, and there's like barbecue, and we shared the stage at that one with like a bunch of cool bands, including Rocky Erickson, who's like one of my fucking favorite ever, you know, and it was one of the first shows back for Rocky. So it's just like, fuck yeah, man, we want to do this. But the prior year in 2005, Gavin McInnes was still associated with Vice. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's a time when like he had flipped a fucking screw, you know, but most people weren't really paying attention because they were just reading the do's and don'ts and fucking Vice, you know. Mm-hmm. They didn't really notice that this guy is like going to fucking far right, like Nazi rallies and shit, and writing about him sort of sympathetically, you know. And in 2005, he had, like, under his direction, Vice had done this thing, and it was like a shock value thing is the way they played it up, where they flew Nazi flag downtown Austin, you know.
Wow.
And so, like, you know, we were invited to do this festival, and I had heard about that. And a lot of people just had, oh, yeah, it's funny, man. It's shocking, you know. And you know, I had concerns about it. You know, I talked to our you know, booking agent, eventually directly called the people at Vice, and they're like, oh yeah, it's nothing like that will happen. It was a shock value thing, and we've apologized and whatever, you know. And I think, like, if I were to, I mean, obviously now I would be like, fuck you, you know, and not do it. But that's the kind of stuff I think that sort of, like, in the context of these shows, or like a band or a label like Burger Records, you know, you kind of find yourself like, I have, even whatever I may care about as a fucking white dude, I'm in a position where I'm like, you know, have probably been more tolerant than I should be or should have been, you know, and more forgiving than I should have been about shit that really was just straight up just fucked, you know. So I mean, that's kind of something that I think about a lot, you know.
It's interesting that you say that, because as a black dude in this genre, I would say, I don't know how Pascual or John feel about this percentage. 80% of the time I walk into a room, someone's going to say something that the average person would conceive as racist to my face.
Right. Living in the Midwest, it would be under whispers 95% of the time. but I know what you're saying.
You know what I mean?
But living in the Midwest, because, you know, Midwest are nice. You know, no one's gonna say anything to your face, but they sure are gonna whisper it.
Like I don't even.
So
I honestly,
I hear what you're saying.
I wouldn't even know how and when to approach certain situations, because so much shit is just like commonplace. Like the story John tells about the going to practice and the police fucking with you. When Cindy and I were on tour with LaFin, we got pulled over a lot, like a really lot. Yeah. And sometimes the pullovers were really bad, where people were getting taken out of cars and shit like that. And you do all that, and then you got to go show up at a venue where people say these kind of snide comments. At a certain point, those comments just fucking roll off your shoulders, and you're like, yeah. Just the fact that I'm fucking here is like a victory in and of itself.
Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting, though, right? It's like, I mean, coming from a variety of different perspectives, obviously here, and I'm coming from the one that I have, but I mean, you end up, I think, trying to contextualize stuff or just justify it or be like, hey, it's almost like, I have to put up with some shit here, but this is, I'm going to have to do it for this opportunity, and that sucks, man. It's like, that's sort of a fucking paradigm that's created the conditions for the stuff I was talking about earlier in terms of the demographics, like the way that people we're talking about, like a really serious shift among a lot of people who are into this kind of music, away from sort of stuff that's like misanthropic, or you could say is just like nihilistic or just confrontational, into like overt, like far right, fucking racist, fascist thinking,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
No. I mean that's kind of it. I mean, it's just kind of like that's a context has been built for that. And I mean, for my part, like, I just want to take, I want to take fucking responsibility for, any role that I've played in that personally, just in the by not having developed a more, kind of overt opposition to it. Like I said, that Vice story, it's like, I probably, really I should have had a different reaction. I mean, we're talking about a guy, Gavin McInnes. It's like the point A to point B fucking trajectory there is huge. I mean, we're talking about the guy who founded the Proud Boys, So like, I mean, it's important to recognize that stuff that seems like what it might be, that's probably what it fucking is. And it's okay to say like, fuck this, man. This is bullshit.
And that's what's so interesting about. So I was talking to he's going to be coming on shortly, Joshua Kahn Russell, and we were talking about black metal. He comes from the world of hardcore, and I guess for me those lines definitely cross. I crossed the shit out of those streams. I don't mind the genres, but he was one of those kids that he stayed in the path of punk and hardcore, and it led him to the path of activism. And he didn't know about black metal, and he didn't really get it. And so we were talking about like Mayhem and Varg and all that shit. And he was like, "This sounds disturbing." which is like none of this shit sounds cool.
Which that's the point, right? But it's like that's what the appeal is, So yeah. I think that's one of the things that people have to sort of wrestle with, and that's what I was talking about before too. It's like, if you're gonna think that Death in June is cool, then you shouldn't be fucking surprised, and you're not gonna really like internally fucking police your own scene. You shouldn't be fucking surprised if somebody is standing outside the venue fucking throwing rocks at it or whatever, at some point. Like,
and what's the deal with
a shock,
Can you explain to me, because I don't, silly me, explain to me the whole Death in June thing? They're supposed to be like fascists or something?
Yeah, I mean, they are.
Oh, okay.
There
is no kind of
overtly, and there are a lot of people who are, I mean, within the context of the same thing's true at the edges of noise rock, right? Like, you've got people who are playing just abrasive music with the intent of being confrontational and abrasive, but. You think like back in the late 80s, early 90s, like a guy like Jim Goad, who was like Answer Me was a fanzine that I think everybody fucking read that shit. Mm-hmm. And that dude's an overt fascist, straight up. Like, he's not, covering it up at all. I mean, he's not a Nazi. Mm-hmm. He's a fascist. There are a lot of different kinds of fascists, Mm-hmm. And, there are guys who are, the guy who wrote the fucking, the book that was made into that movie about Mayhem, eventually, what is it? Fire or something, or I can't remember the name
Lords
of the
book.
That dude also, he calls himself an eco-fascist, and he's like, plays sort of like noisy, kind of music. So it's sort of, you're skirting this like nationalism and ultra-authoritarianism, and and overt fascism. And people will be like, well, we're not Nazis, you know? And it's like, that's where we're at. I mean, that is intentionally sort of the dark appeal of that kind of stuff. And so people have to make decisions. Like if you want to not have that be the association that scene has, man, I feel like that's a hard fucking task. You know, I remember, you know, still in the late 80s and early 90s when I was coming up in punk rock, we were actively fighting, like fist fighting and physically fighting Nazi skinheads to kick them out of our shows in our community. And here in the Bay Area, I mean, it was super violent. I know a lot of people who have tons of stories about that shit. And those people were forced to fucking leave. They were extricated from the fucking scene. So that was a really overt thing that had to happen. If that hadn't taken place, then the punk rock scene would probably be, there would be like Nazi punk bands, a lot more than there were, you know? So, you know, you have to actively do it, I feel like, you know, and there's a desire among a lot of people who are into certain kinds of metal, including black metal, to be like, hey, you know, let's just not really, you know, address it and, you know, allow stuff like, you know, people who are overt fascists to like have a merch table at a show and be like, well, you know, the bands aren't fascists, you know, stuff like that. And it's like, that's not, you know, that's not enough. Like you shouldn't be, you know, be surprised if that's the context that you're building. If people who are outside of your community are going to be fucking really pissed about it and come knocking at the fucking door. That's what I feel like, you know.
I agree with that. I want to welcome Joshua Kahn Russell. Who's echoing?
Could be Josh, me.
I don't think it's me. I'm on mute. But hi.
Joshua is with the Wildfire Project. He is an old school hardcore head that came up in the hardcore scene on the East Coast. Him and I had a long talk about this heavy. Sorry, there's a horrible dog in this thing. It just broke my train of thought. But I just want to introduce Josh. Josh, welcome to the show. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It was a fun moment to come in. Paul, that was also part of my story, was fighting Nazis in the punk scene in my youth too.
Where are you from, dude?
I grew up in Connecticut. And so
okay, man. I lived in Maine as a kid, so it's like Maine, fucking Portland, and Boston. The FSU skins and Hammer skins and all that shit.
Yeah, exactly. For us, it was in Meriden, Connecticut. It was specifically like, you know, Connecticut has so much wealth next to so much poverty. So there are a lot of poor white kids who are really vulnerable to neo-Nazi recruitment, or at least were at that time. Where they would come in and say, hey, I have a story to tell you about why your life sucks.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, my first kind of engagement politically was when I was 13, and it was, you know, confronting Nazis at shows and stuff like that.
That's insane to have to confront.
It was really, I mean, dude, you know, a buddy of mine, Dave, his entire face was crushed with a hammer. Like, it had to be rebuilt, you know. It was really pretty brutal. And I mean, and ultimately I left. Like that's a major reason that I live in California, you know, like it was too fucking dangerous, dude. I booked a Born Against show in Portland. And I mean, I was, dude, after that show, I was chased. I was chased with at first like a bunch of dudes. Then it was a bunch of hammer skins. Then it was a bunch of guys with like bats and shit. Then it was fucking, you know, I pulled this lattice work off this staircase and hid under it and pulled it back under, but I could hear the fucking guys circling the block fucking, so, you know, they were out to fucking kill me, dude, you know? And I just eventually was like, you know, fuck, dude, I'm going to die here, you know? I mean, and I appreciate the fact that where I live now, like in the Bay Area, the reason that this was a safe place to be is because other people had done that for me, you know? I mean, I know a lot of those people now who like, they got fucking beat down. People died, you know, and they fucking cleared house, and this has become a safe space for people to fucking be, and play music like this, you know? Whereas, you know, if you live in Boston, it's really not, you know? I mean, Connecticut too. It's like, it's still, you know, it's still contested ground, you know?
That's why I don't fuck with them spots that y'all was in. I go to the hood spots and play like Bridgeport. Last time I was in Connecticut, we played some hood. Like, we played with hip hop groups. Like, it was in the hood spot in Bridgeport. I was like, damn, this is what fucking poverty looks like. Some real shit.
We used to do shows in Bridgeport all the time. It was at a VFW hall that we would always go to over and over again.
There was actually a legit spot out there called Two Boots.
Oh, I haven't heard that. It's been a minute since I've been in Connecticut.
Oh, that shit's closed. Everything is closed. Everywhere. I got posters on my wall from like 7 years ago, which isn't even that long ago. And every venue on that motherfucker is done. Like, COVID has changed the landscape of the music that we do on a level that we just don't understand.
Yeah. It was already declining before this too. So it was like, it was already not a great situation. And this just was like the nail in the coffin.
The venue I met Pascual at is gone.
Yep.
And that was not that many years ago. 6 years ago?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Is the Frequency still open in Madison, Jonathan? Is Jonathan still there?
Oh, you mean Joshua?
No, Jonathan. There's a black guy.
Oh.
JB. He's frozen.
Yeah, I see that.
He is frozen. He's frozen.
Oh, that's fucked up.
You just put a picture in front of the camera.
Your black ass is gone, John.
Voted off.
You got voted off the island.
Yeah.
There can only be one. You got Highlandered.
No,
that's how these scenes really do work. That's
the energy we need in this.
Hey,
music
you know what? I noticed maybe this happened to Pascual. I know it ain't happened to y'all two motherfuckers. But I've definitely gone in places where you're in a little town where there's one black dude in the scene, and then I show up, and it's just fucked up the whole like novelty of him being there. And homie looks at me like, we got problems. He's not that cool.
That's funny.
Fuck him.
Yeah, I've got the you know, I was joking around, like, you know, being a mixed race Hispanic dude. I call myself a White Walker. You know, I can walk into, yeah, like, you know, I don't really have an accent, and I speak Spanish, and I have a really Spanish name, but like, I can, like, if people don't know that about me, I can probably kind of skate by under the radar. But like, there's the other part of me that's like I can't go into these spaces and be too like forthright about who I am either. So it's like it's not a big deal in big cities, but when I get into places like Knoxville, Tennessee and stuff, like I'm like real like hesitant to get into that get to know you phase with fans or not even our fans, like, especially when they're not there to see me, you know, I'm just like touring with the big band or whatever. And it's like, you know, you can see a real tone shift. Like, you can kind of start a conversation with these guys, and like, they'll be like, oh man, you guys are real good and blah, blah, blah. And then like, they'll ask me my name, and then it'll take like 5 times for them to even understand what I'm saying. And then, but it's like the tone changes, because then they're like, what kind of name is that? And then I'm like, well, it's a Spanish name.
What kind of name is your name?
Dude, I get asked literally verbatim that question all the time on tour. And it's like, what kind of name is that? Or where's that name from? And
there's not to interrupt you, but as an aside related to that like way that people think about stuff, there's this is Jules.
Hey.
There's so in Maine, you know, kind of in the kind of out there a little ways. One of the first things that I was ever involved in that was really a political action was I joined DSA when I was like 13 out there, and there was a chicken farm that trucked in people who were, you know, Central American, Mexican people from throughout Latin America, South America and stuff. and it was like slave conditions kind of stuff. So it was an organizing effort, kind of a worker organizing effort, and an effort to also get the guy, fined for the stuff that he was doing and whatnot. But anyway, I was out there and I was at a convenience store and some guy was standing in line, and he's an old man guy, so he's like, "Yeah, I don't really know. I don't know about them people. What they're talking in some weird way. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're saying." And the cashier at the store was like, "Well, that's just that's the way they talk. It's their language." And he was like, "I don't know. You're talking that Mexican." And he's like, Jesus Christ spoke American, and that's good enough.
Dude. No, I wanted
to get out there and you're like, fuck, dude, I'm in it here,
We so I was on tour with a band called Divine Heresy probably about like 11 years ago now. And the guitarist is a dude named Dino Casares. So he's a pretty well-known guitarist in extreme metal. He was in the band Fear Factory, still is. But he's a Mexican dude, and he's a pretty clearly Mexican dude. And
yes. Very large, clearly Mexican
dude. Big Mexican dude. And I get a lot more Mexican around him. So I'm one of those people that because I speak Spanish and stuff, it's just like I code switch. So like, I just speak Spanish to Dino, like, especially when I'm trying to say something like around other people that maybe don't want to hear it. So we were in, we had a problem with a bearing on our trailer in La Grande, Oregon. And it's like in the middle of the Oregon Trail, and it's a tiny town. I think it's a college town, but it's not like a versatile college town. And we go there, and so Dino and I we kind of pulled aside and like talked in Spanish a little bit to like talk about the issue and like, should we pay these guys to do this, or should we just like say fuck it? And we ended up saying fuck it, left the trailer, rented a U-Haul trailer, and just like took off. But we noticed the whole time we were there, like people were acting real fucking weird with us, and we thought it was just because we were speaking Spanish. I was like, dude, these fucking white people in the middle of nowhere, they just like freak out when they hear this. But then I was like, this is kind of like not. I mean, it's just Spanish isn't something like you hear it everywhere, and even in small towns, there's Mexicans that work at McDonald's and stuff, and so it's like. So I don't know, it kind of put me off, but I was like, whatever, like they were acting super sketchy with us and we just bounced. And as we were on our way out of town, I was about to turn onto the freeway and I noticed cops behind us with the lights blaring, and I'm like, fuck. So I stop, pull over on the on-ramp, kind of off to the side. And we waited there a few minutes, and it was like literally like 3 minutes or something. I'm like, nobody's coming up. And so I'm like, I'm going to roll down the window and see what the fuck's going on. And I can just barely hear like in the background, like step out of the vehicle. And it's like, Jesus Christ. All right. So, and they were saying driver, step out of the vehicle. And so I was driving. And so I get out, and because of the way I stopped, I was like halfway around a corner. So it was like the van and the trailer. So I couldn't really see them at all. And, I kind of go walking around, and finally I get around the trailer, and there are like 6 cop cars behind us. And I only saw the one, and all of them have their guns drawn. And I'm like, fuck, dude, like this, first off, like, there's no reason you pull people over like this unless something's up. And so I throw my hands up immediately. And, I'm just like, okay, like my hands are up. I'm just, don't fucking shoot me. And I start, and they like, called me towards the car. Everything was okay. They cuffed me. They stick me in the back of the car. And I'm just like waiting, and they just like approach the van. And like this cop asked me like, okay, what are you doing? And why are you here? And I was like, well, we're a band and we're on tour. And then she's like, who's the, what did she say? It's like, who's the Latino in the van? And I'm like, he's my friend Dino. He's a musician. We're a band. We're on tour right now. We threw a bearing on our trailer. We rented a U-Haul. We're just on our way to our next show, which was in Vancouver. And And she's like, okay, well, just hang tight. And so I'm sitting in the back of the cop car, cuffed, and like,
Jesus,
dude, and like probably about, I don't know, it was like a good 15 minutes. Like, no, they didn't pull anyone else out of the van, but I couldn't really see because we were sort of around the corner from where I parked. So it was like tough to know what was going on. They finally come back and she like pulls me out of the car and then she uncuffs me and she's like, I'm really sorry. This was a misunderstanding. He fit the description of a Mexican who murdered someone here like some weeks ago or something. And I was
because
like,
he was Mexican.
And I, to be honest with you, like for Dino to fit the description of a Mexican, like just any Mexican at random, like that's really unlikely, you know.
That's fucking stretching it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's a big fucking dude. Like you just don't see Mexicans that look like him with long ass hair and just this big fucking dude like rolling around everywhere. So I don't know where they got that from, but yeah, that was like a fucking ordeal. But I'm positive the reason they called was because when he went up and like was talking to them at first, like nobody said anything, but the second we spoke Spanish to each other, all of a sudden everyone got fucking sketchy with us. And like I'm positive that's what it was. And I learned my lesson. Like I just chose from then on not to speak Spanish in front of fucking anyone that I didn't know in those kinds of towns, because it's just like it's risky, man. It's weird.
Well, I mean, they're gonna fuck with you regardless. I told you about the time me and Chicky had a blown tire and they pulled the guns on us.
Yeah, man.
And they were looking for a white guy.
God damn.
They were very confused.
Like motherfuckers, it was like the movies where they get behind the car with the guns on you and shit like that. And the sheriff was running down the middle of the street. No. Because he knew that they were looking for a white dude. They had Cindy on the fucking ground with the AR on her. And it's like, word? Like y'all was looking for a white guy? Okay.
Yeah, no.
And then you got to go play a show after that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the thing. We made it on time that night too. It was, we were hauling, dude. We had to go from Denver to Vancouver that day.
That's a really shitty drive.
Well, you know, like you get those. I don't know if you've ever had to book a tour where you had to follow a bus in a van. You know, so it's like
don't do it.
Worst. We were doing that in Indiana, and this is a pretty good example of just like opposite day kind of, you know, just privilege scenario. It's a little bit of sort of switching it up though too. Like I was going maybe 95 in Indiana, where it's like that's a serious crime in that state.
God. Yeah.
You can't do that apparently. But it's like we had to catch up, you know. We were in that exact situation where we had an 8-hour fucking drive. Everybody had to pee every 15 fucking minutes, and you know. And then I got pulled over. I didn't even notice that the cop, because we had a trailer behind us. I didn't even notice the cop for like 2 or 3 minutes, you know. And I was going like 95. He was so mad, like he was just infuriated, in a rage when I finally pulled over, and he made me get out. I got in the car, but he didn't cuff me. I mean, I was, you know, it's like a felony criminal speeding charge in Indiana. I sat in the front seat with him, and he was like, you know, I'm going to take your van. I'm going to, you know, and it was Easter. And I was like, well, you know, praise the Lord. Happy Easter. And he was like, his eyes changed, you know, and he was like, yeah, you know. I was like, well, you know, God has a plan for us all, you know. I know that I made a mistake here and that sort of thing. And ultimately, you know, he's like, I'm just going to reduce this to like, it was you know, I was going 5 miles an hour over the speed limit on the ticket. But that's like, that would never fucking happen. I mean, this is like Bible Belt fucking, you know, clan territory.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's no fucking way. I mean, I thought I was fucked anyway, you know? I mean, I pulled out all the stops on that one, you know. And
have you ever played Indianapolis, Jonathan?
Oh yeah, play at the Melody Inn a few times. Last time I was there, played at Joyful Noise a couple times.
Is that like a normal thing for you Midwesterners? Do you guys have to play Indianapolis?
You know, it's funny. I've only in a couple of bands have I played in Indianapolis. It always seemed like if it wasn't the Melody Inn, there really weren't a lot of other places. It was just one of those towns that even other bands that I played with, like from Chicago or Milwaukee or Minneapolis, if it wasn't the Melody Inn, there really wasn't anywhere else. Now Bloomington was a spot that I probably played at. Bloomington in the end, I probably played there more than I played Indianapolis.
I've played Terre Haute.
Yeah.
Really? I've never played there.
I played Terre Haute, and there's another. What's the other little college town in Indianapolis? Not Bloomington.
Oh, up north. I know which.
South Bend?
Evansville. No,
South Bend.
Evansville.
Yeah, South Bend. South Bend, Bloomington, Terre Haute, and Indianapolis.
Yeah.
That's
No. Let me ask
those
you
are
guys.
the I mean, not even really. It's not like it's Austin or something like that. You know? But it's still like an oasis in the midst of like. It's fucking scary, dude. Even for a white dude, it's like it's fucking could be terrifying and like driving through parts of like that area. You know, when you're in the country out there.
But don't you feel like
fuck,
though?
dude.
Don't you feel like with the music that we do with punk, and especially to Jonathan's point, like noisier shit that's a little more obscure. No matter where you play, do you ever feel like if someone's crazy enough to book the band with the black dude in it, then that's probably where the cool kids in the town are, or at least the outcast kids are in the town? You ever feel that way? Or
they have no idea.
That's
or
fucked
they don't
up.
even know.
I want you to know. I don't want neither one of us to be surprised when I walk in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you're saying.
That's a legit fucking, I mean,
green room.
Fucking green room kind of thing. I mean, straight up, especially like the experience of like living in, but it's true in like, I mean, it's true in Wisconsin. It's true like throughout much of the United States, I think,
like where you're from.
There's an unknown element that's been, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's like there's this part of this stuff that's a thread in there that creates the condition where it's like you don't really fucking know. That sucks,
Like here's I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to go back to something before the internet rudely cut me off. Is that you were making a statement about taking the shine off the one black guy that's at the show? I have experienced that, definitely. But more so, I've experienced the opposite. And I don't know if you mentioned this at all, but I've experienced the opposite where I show up and I start setting up my drums. In fact, I remember the first time I met Cassie Green, and she played with a band called Dead Halos with Tony Ash.
Yeah.
From Secret Friends.
Mm-hmm.
And
Coliseum, and also the Great Coliseum.
Yep. He played the Coliseum as well. I remember when I walked in, and she saw me, and I saw her, and I was like, "Yes, somebody, another black person." And this is Louisville, Kentucky, and my family, both my parents are from Louisville, and from the West End, and we were playing on the East End, and growing up when I was a kid, and we go to Louisville all the time, and it's a very de facto segregated city. Most of the black folks live on the West End, white folks live on the East End. That's changing a bit, but definitely where the place where I played at, the Mag Bar.
I played there.
If you've been there, Mag Bar. Yeah. When I was a kid, you probably wouldn't seen too many black folks in that side of town.
I was the only one there when I played there.
Yeah. See, I wasn't in the like there or Kaichu or all the places I've played at are on East End, in Louisville. But I mean, we still have a good friendship to this day. I mean, it's funny because I've told you about the PRF events, and for anyone who doesn't,
that's how I met you. We
yeah.
might have been the only colored folks there at that show, I think. I'm pretty sure you and I were the only ones there.
People, yeah. Besides my friend Andy, who I brought with me, who lives
So you had
down
to
the
bring
street
one.
from Motswood. I did. I did have to bring one. I thought that was part of how you got in. Bring your own Negro.
That's how you know you're at like the wokest show ever if you get a discount for bringing a black person.
I got 2. What does that get me? You took me off my
Sorry.
off my thought. No. That's but that was funny though. But what was I gonna say?
You were gonna say you and I toured together as 2 black people just to fuck up.
Yes,
all
we
those
did.
towns.
I was just telling, and I'll even say I was just telling my wife about how when we went on that tour, and I was like so excited to be able to play with you, because I'll be honest, I have never played in a. This is how crazy this is. I've never played in a. I played in a blues band with another black man, but I've never played in a rock band with another black man or woman ever until I played with you.
That was my.
Sad.
True story. I was in Des Moines, and I was talking to a guy in a very large hardcore band.
Yeah.
And we were having a conversation, and we were talking about black people in heavy music.
Was it Slipknot?
And it was not Slipknot.
Okay, all right, just making sure.
I'm not gonna try to, because I don't want to call dude out. He's not a bad guy at all. He's actually a really nice guy.
Yeah.
And he didn't say this as being a dick at all. He was like, unfortunately, he actually had prefaced it by saying, unfortunately, and I want to get you guys' opinion about this, especially Josh and Paul that come from the hardcore world. He said, if there was an all black band, it would be looked at as a novelty. And
yeah, which is isn't that strange? Like where it's that's just it's interesting now though. Like living here in the Bay, like a number of people that I've played with have been folks who are Latino. In High Tone, like the last record, the woman who's Latino, like the guy who's playing synth and stuff is of mixed race, but he's black guy with very light skin features, And I think there's some of that code switching stuff going on for him sometimes too, and some it's the complication of all of it, But like, it seems like generally here the dynamic exists where there really is a lot more. There are some great fucking bands here now who are like some like sort of death punk bands, and some that are African Americans, female people. Like it feels like there's like really an upswelling of just a greater representation of people in music here, locally. But like, I don't, again, I think the context for that was built, like the reason that that's true here is because the context for a greater amount of diversity was created here, And you have to do it. You have to like make it intentionally, fucking make it possible to do that,
Yeah.
And like to what you said, Jason, it's like this is sort of this kind of music for a lot of fucking white dudes who just want to fucking like get yoked and fucking hate women or whatever they want to do. Like that their perspective is that this is their last fucking like island to fucking claim, So there's a lot of resistance to the idea that people should even do that, I feel like I see that on message boards and shit. It's like, people fucking like, there's some real fear. I think it is, fear and resentment and anger and all kinds of stuff.
I want to get into that. Josh, you have something you want to get off your chest?
Oh no, I mean, it's just, to be honest, it's actually been a minute since I've felt feel like I've been a part of a music scene, so this is a little bit dated, but like, you know, I remember in Connecticut, the relationship that we had with like the New York kind of crust punk scene or the New York hardcore scene, you know, where in the city there was a really multiracial punk scene, and there wasn't in Connecticut. And Connecticut, the scene, you know, in the context of us fighting Nazis and shit, it was very politicized, and there was a way that like the way that race was talked about was so weird. It was like it was aspirational in this weird way, where like when there'd be even like, you know, female fronted bands, they were celebrated to the degree that it was really tokenistic and sort of over, like it was, which to me, even at that time, you know, and you know, we were talking about this last night, like it just revealed how fucking low the bar was. That just like a couple of women out front, or you know, a couple of black kids starting bands was suddenly, you know, hailed as like, oh, we're this sort of like beacon of you know, we really are what we say we want to be. And that was, you know, to most of my friends who are not into heavy music, it was laughable, you know. And I do remember coming out to the Bay Area and yeah, just experiencing, or even, you know, like when you were saying before about like, you know, black bands being a novelty, there was a way that I remember growing up, we listened in such dedicated ways to bands like Death or Bad Brains or Fishbone in a way that was, it was a novelty, but what was also a novelty was having racialized politics on purpose. And like, so it on one hand, yeah, I mean, it was interesting to pull apart, but what all of it just revealed was like, I don't know. I maybe I came from like a weird self-loathing section of the scene, but it was like honestly a lot of white kids who hated the fact that the scene was so white and felt shitty about it, but also didn't know how to do anything else because that was their own bubble that they were in. And it was one of the reasons why I gravitated away from punk was it was so knotted up and confused, I think, you know.
So that's interesting that you say that, and unfortunately we lost Paul. I think his internet connection is down. Because this is what I wanted to ask you guys. So the last tour I went on, I saw you, Pascual, on that last tour. Actually, the last night.
Yep.
We made that fateful drive back from Albuquerque to Oakland. I felt like, and I don't know how I feel about this, and there's a reason why I talk to you guys and why I like all you guys. And Josh, I know we just like met, but I've heard you speak before, and I like your the context in which you put things in. I felt like there was this demarcating line now with music, where before, because we only had terrestrial radio, MTV, and whatever underground scene you were adjacent to, you could kind of slide into a lot of different genres that you liked. And now, because I can listen to exactly what I want to listen to, whenever I want to listen to it, and I'm going to keep getting exactly what I want, there's these little micro scenes. And playing this last tour, playing in their micro scene, if you will, it was a scene of people of color, which I'd never seen, which of course I dug. It was a lot of queer and non-gender conforming people of color, which was cool, right? I'd never seen that before, like a whole scene of it. Like I'd never seen that. That was cool. But it was so. I'm getting an echo. Somebody's echoing. That's Paul. It was so confining that it felt like it couldn't grow, and it didn't feel very inclusive of anything else. And so when we ask those larger questions of kind of like, how do we get beyond this? Like, I'm not opposed to having that safe space for those for people that feel marginalized. I mean, I get it. I can only imagine what it must feel like. I know what it feels like to be me going to a show, but add gender nonconforming on there, add, queer on there, and I'm sure you're getting shit on even worse. Or maybe they feel more comfortable to shit on you.
Yeah, I think, and we really talked at length about this.
We talked like 4 or 5 in the morning.
Yeah, it was a work night, dude. I got like an hour of sleep. Yeah, it was. It's tough, man, because like, so I come from a world where like our scene is culturally really different than most scenes, and so we exist in this scene where like it's almost, I mean, nowadays it's a little different, but when I growing up, especially in Santa Fe, not Albuquerque, but Santa Fe is like it was so deeply Native and Hispanic that it was like there were about like 3 white kids, and then like the rest were Hispanic, and then like 15 Native dudes, and it was always like, and the safety of that was not really recognized, because we just were like, this is the culture here, this is how it is. Mm-hmm. But when you got into the larger scene, like, so like we'd go to a big example I can think of is, in like 94, 95, I went to a Pantera concert, and I was actually there to see Neurosis. They were opening for them, and
damn.
And I was, don't get me wrong, I liked Pantera back then. It was fine. But I like was not ready for the cultural difference in that scene, even in Albuquerque. Like there were like legitimate skinheads there. There were like a lot of like white kids who were like very like hostile towards other people in a way that it felt really disingenuous. And this is the thing that,
were they fucking hostile?
They were largely hostile. No, but they really. The thing was that like I wasn't really prepared for that, because like I grew up in such a safe little bubble of diversity and minority bubble, that I kind of felt like really thrown off by it. But that kind of goes back to what you were saying about how a lot of these scenes kind of like tolerate things a little too much, and like kind of how black metal is like that, like, mm-hmm. and that scene like really was very tolerant of that like Nazi inclusion, and like I'm not gonna make any value judgments about Pantera. Like I don't really care. Like I know Phil's got his weird shit going on, but like. It was just like, I was just like, this wouldn't be cool where I'm from. Like if a Nazi walked into our fucking show, they'd be fucking out. And like here they're just around, and like people are like, who don't seem to be Nazis, are just like talking to them. And it was like, I don't know, it was really weird to me. And that sort of like caught me off guard. And to sort of go back to what we were saying about that scene that you were in on that tour, like, I feel like, it's like real easy to be an outsider to it, without kind of, you can kind of accidentally be an outsider to it, because you're like, oh, it's not enough that I'm a minority. It's like I have to have more, like I'm still kind of an outsider, because like the real nitty gritty of this group is that it's a queer and non-binary space, and it's a it's an inclusive, like gender inclusive space, and it's like and sometimes it gets real hard to navigate into that, and it's like kind of I don't know, like I mean I'm not comparing them to a scene that has anything to do with Nazis or anything. I mean, I really, if anything, I compare them to my scene that was like diverse and full of minority people. But at the same time, like walking into that can be hard, because you are, your identity comes from having to fight the outside world a lot, except that you're walking into a space where like they also have to fight the world you're from on top of that. And especially like queer, like anything that's like queer and not gender normative, you got like Hispanic kids that, like, I mean, there weren't gay kids where I grew up, because they were so scared of what would happen if they came out, and so like we may have been a minority culture, but like we also had like sort of a way of othering people within our group if they were any, different. And even I dealt with that as a mixed race kid in that culture, so, that's all to say, like, I really, we had a talk, and I have my opinions about like the woke culture and like how some of that maybe, comes from a disingenuous place, but like, but navigating that
woke for all seasons,
woke for all seasons. Yeah. And, but it's hard, man. Like, we clash at that point, right? Like, I mean, not necessarily in that world, but like, there's like these subcultures that are trying to like be really inclusive to their own. And then you kind of walk in and it's like, well, it should be enough that I am, a person of color and I respect these things and I want to fight for the same ideals. But then there's like a point where you step on some toes because like you don't know the language, you don't know the proper like, the context of everything, and you're trying not to be a dick, but sometimes you are because you accidentally called him her or her him, and that happened.
That happened. Okay, this was the point where the rest of the band, they didn't quit because we you saw us all together, but they were like mentally done.
Yeah,
we were in, and I wanted to tell you about this, Josh. We were in Richmond, Virginia, and I think me and John might have had this conversation. We were in Richmond, Virginia, playing this show, and the kid that threw the show was he was, how do you pronounce it? How do you say it? He identified
maybe just like gender neutral kind of they them.
Sure, it was they. Yes, thank you. So no one had a problem with anything, right? We didn't have a problem with anything, but there were definitely some people there that were cisgender that they weren't looking for trouble. Nobody was there looking for trouble. This was not one of those shows where people were looking for trouble, but there was a couple. I had never been in a room full of black kids listening to heavy music. Never happened to me. It was the coolest shit ever.
That's pretty exciting.
I stopped that shit. This was in Richmond, Virginia.
Right.
It was at this really cool restaurant. The guy that had ran it had lived in the Bay for a while too, and it was like a Cajun restaurant. The food was off the hook. Like everything was good. The band's all in a good mood until we played the show. I stopped the show at one point and I said, I've never seen a room full of black people, so excuse me if I look really happy right now. This is the craziest shit I've ever seen. And it was a kind of a diverse crowd of black people. There were some people there that was just there because it was a thing to do. And they were more from the hip hop world. There was definitely kids that were there from the metal world. So there was this weird mix of moshing and please don't hit me. You know that thing. So I had said, I was like, all right, this is the last song. I know you guys want to mosh, but let's keep in mind there's motherfuckers here that don't do that shit. So we can all jump, right? And everybody got hella juiced. It was fucking beautiful, right? We're all excited. And as I walk away, bam, this black chick hits this white dude, knocks him out. White dude gets up. He's like, "What did I do?" And I'm sitting there like, well, "Yeah, what did he do?" Because I didn't see anything. And so she hit him because he had a Burzum patch on.
Yeah.
Which is a black metal band that is known for having a real racist singer. And so the dude's like, "What?" And he's sitting there like, "What?" And and she's like, in tears, she's so upset. She goes, "You knew you wore that motherfucking patch here in front of all these motherfucking..." And security walks up, and they're kind of like, "What?" And security looks at the one white dude, and he just goes, "Hey, man, you got to go." Like, I don't know what you did exactly, but I'm trying to live my life too. So he takes him outside.
But that's kind of like, that's sort of what I've been thinking a lot about, and what I mentioned sort of earlier. Like, I don't think that, I think it's interesting that he was just surprised or didn't really understand why that would be, like, he just never even fucking thought that maybe that would bother somebody.
No.
Like, and I mean, that's kind of like, well, I don't think it should be that fucking shocking. You know?
I think these kids, and this is just, maybe this is my naivete. I think because he was a kid and he apologized to me. He sent me an email after he found the band, sent us an email. It was like, please come back. We really liked you. I'm sorry this all happened. Him and the girl were having a heated dialogue. She was very upset. And she had said, I asked her what was wrong, and she pushed me away. She got mad. She came back to me later. She apologized. And she said, and again, I'm not from Richmond, Virginia. She was basically, I'm paraphrasing. She was like, there's a scene of these neo-Nazis, and they wear these black metal band patches at shows as they're kind of under Nazi shit. And he wore it to a show that was predominantly black people, and she felt that he knew what he was doing. The kid was like, I don't see this band. I think the dude's stupid, but it's like, whatever. Because,
yeah, I know people like that.
How about this, though, Jason? Like, would you say that kid learned something? He got fucking socked, but did he fucking learn something?
Mm-hmm. I hope.
Maybe.
You know,
I mean, I know
he
kids.
Definitely couldn't say again, oh, I didn't realize it.
The problem I had was after the fact, the headliner got on and kind of bragged about it. And when you guys are telling these stories about fighting Nazis, you guys are fighting people that are coming there with bad intentions. I think there's this is just me. I think there's a difference between a dumb kid and bad intentions.
You know, that's totally fair. And so that's, rather than having sort of a prescriptive answer. I mean, I really genuinely, I think it's important more than to say like, man, we got to just punch these guys in the face. I think it's better for me to ask, you, Jason, or you,
John,
like what do you think would be helpful? Like what are things that could be, create some kind of contextual difference,
I don't think here's my thought is she had a visceral reaction to something. Yeah, and exactly. Honestly, I've definitely over the last, I mean, I'm 48 years old, so I'm not going to haul off and punch somebody at this point in my life. I mean, but when I was much younger, maybe I would react this, or maybe not. But I guess the point is that I know people that I had a good friend of mine who's First Nationer, and he used to love Berzoom. He doesn't listen to Berzoom anymore, and that's only been within the last 2 or 3 years. But he was like, well, I don't care. I can separate the music from the band or the person. I personally can't do that, but some people say they can. Maybe that's what this kid thought. But that girl actually obviously had a visceral reaction to seeing it. But I think when you're on, at least from my opinion, being black, you rarely get the benefit of the doubt when you do stuff like that. And for the kid wearing that patch, just thinking, well, it's just a band. Well, that's privilege. He can do that.
I absolutely agree.
Man. I mean, he can. Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, and for her, I mean, I'm glad that people were able to talk about it to get the context, like you said, Paul. But in that moment, sometimes you're gonna feel these hands. I mean, that's just what's gonna happen. I mean, because it's so many times before it's happened the other way, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong or indifferent. I just think that you feel I know for myself, my cat's just incessantly meowing at me. I personally, in talking about shows, and talking about going to shows, and for me, there's never any diversity. It's a sea of white people. And I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan around a lot of white people. I've always been surrounded by white people. Always knowing that I'm black. It took me a long time to actually really understand, even though I had my parents and I had my siblings, because I grew up with so many white people and being the only one in places, or and to really even understand what it is to be a black person in this country.
You would have lost your shit
time
at that show.
Yeah, I would have. I probably would have started. I probably would have cried. There was a show here in Madison where it was when I was in Tyranny. It was us, this band 12s. It's really good, kind of shorty U.S. Maple Jesus Lizard clone band. This band Carbon Bangle. They had my man Terrence in it, and my man Terrence, and I had two black people in it, and Salvation from Chicago. That's kind of getting some run right now. His black bass player Victor. First time I've ever seen more than one band with a black member in it, much less 3 of the 4. Mm-hmm. I actually shed a tear. And I was telling people, like, throughout the club, like, I've never seen this before. I've never been at a show, just period. Whether I was going to see a show, I've gone to 3 different CMJs and never run into that. And I don't know how many bands I've seen I saw at CMJ conferences.
But to your point, John, that entire tour was like that, and we were running into things that people were saying to us at certain venues that I had never heard before. Like, they told us about how woke this one spot was going to be in Toronto. They're like, Toronto is like, you can't say anything wrong in Toronto because that's where the woke shit is, and motherfuckers in Toronto, fuck you. And I'm like, word? Okay, whatever. I seen Degrassi Junior High. I'm not really that frightened. And so we had went to this interesting art shop in downtown Toronto, and they asked if we were a band, and we of course said yeah, because you're looking cool. You got your cool band guy shit on, and we've all done it. Everybody on this chat has done it. And so they said, where are you playing? We told them where we were playing, and they were like, oh, that place won't allow white people in if they reach a certain capacity of white people. I was like, word? That sounds like the dumbest shit I've heard in my life. That's like a real thing. And they looked at me mad. These were 2 white ladies. They looked at me mad like I didn't get it. Like I'm supposed to be juiced about that. I'm like, why would I be juiced about that? What if them was the 2 white people that was going to buy all the shirts?
Well, what's funny though? I mean, thinking about like what's been said here, like we're when thinking about like coming to recognition about what it means, like what race means in America for all of us from all of the different contexts. It's one thing to be, it's one thing to come to terms with the cultural conditions that are imposed on us when you're a group that's historically been disenfranchised. But I think that something that's interesting to think about is that most white people really haven't ever thought about what it means to be a white person in America very much. And I know, like in my family's history, my cousin, or he's my uncle, to call him, he's my second cousin, but my Fred Marshall is a jazz player. Mm-hmm. And so he came up in Arkansas in the segregated South in the 50s. So he'd play in, back then the clubs were segregated. So you could play in juke joints if you were a black person. You'd play in honky tonks if you were white, So to play with the fucking dudes he wanted to play with, he had to play in segregated joints, And he's told me a story, before he passed away. He was in the Vince Guaraldi trio. He played on the Charlie Brown Christmas record and stuff like that. He's a good fucking player, good bass player. But he was he told me some pretty crazy stories about like the raids that would happen back then. And I mean, there was a lot of cultural pressure and shit like that. And, you know, you go through stuff like that and you have some realizations about like where you're from and like what's really happening, you know, because you're breaking the rules, you know. And it's only in that kind of context that people can really start to question the paradigm that they live in and start to think about the broader context, I think, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think that what you have been talking about, Jason, is true, that this is sort of like this is like the final island for some of these folks who are like white dudes that just, it seems to me, feel threatened, you know. They feel like the having to think about it is threatening, you know.
I mean, y'all been getting threatened since Rush Limbaugh took over the airwaves in the 80s. I mean,
yeah, I think that's,
you know what
true.
I mean? Basketball. You remember when white people played basketball?
Yeah, yeah, but I think it's true, and it's like there's a guy that I play have like jammed with here and there who, you know, we were talking about, you know, current events kind of stuff, you know, in the wake of the death of George Floyd and the, you know, the public reaction to that. And he was genuinely asking me questions. He's a white dude, you know, and he was like asking real questions about kind of like, you know, history and political context, you know. And that's cool, you know. I think though that a lot of times there's this sort of like visceral, just defensive reaction, and that's kind of where we're at. You know, it seems like that's the springboard for a lot of the stuff that we're
and let me ask you guys.
We see like in the demographics that I was talking about earlier, like, you know, where you have these like really sort of like outsized percentages of people who are really supportive of Trump. You know,
like let me ask you this question then. So I think there's a lot of people in heavy music that are Trump fans, but I also think there's a lot of people in general that are not Trump fans.
Sure, of course.
And that being said, when I was playing these shows in these rooms, I always wanted to thank the crowd for letting us be here because I felt like I was kind of imposing on someone's territory, right? And we were getting really great responses from people. How do we grow this broader left movement? Because as much as we want a Bernie Sanders in office, he can't get a lot of those things passed without real movements, right? Movements is what changes shit, right? Yeah. Abe Lincoln didn't just wake up one day and say slavery's over. FDR didn't just wake up one day and say, you know what you bitches need? Social Security. Booyah. Like, that's not how that shit works, right? So how do we incorporate these really interesting scenes of people of color in heavy music? Because there's some cool music these cats are making. Mm-hmm. But they're keeping it so in this micro scene. How do we get it out and get it to more people and just get more people involved? And this is what you do for a living. 1 second, Paul. I want to get Josh's answer, then I'm gonna get you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to thread. First of all, I just want to say I know I just met a lot of you. I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I want to actually hit. Let me thread a few different points that I heard each of you make to answer that. To go back to Jason, what you were originally saying with the story about the patch puncher, you know, the context that I came out of, you know, like, so the punk scene at that time, it was a youth subculture, right? And it was politicized. And the punk scene that I came out of, you know, it was like, even the Nazi shit that we were fighting, it was a whole big group of kids who were alienated by the society that we live in. And they either went fringe left or fringe right. And so the fights that happened were that. It was the fringe left versus the fringe right, where everyone was just figuring out how to be in the world, you know? And so the ways that every time I saw someone get punched for wearing a patch, which is, I think, at least twice in my life, for us, it was the influence of Oi music. And so like Oi is this like working class, you know, subculture that gave birth to a weird subgenre of punk music in the UK, and then it migrated to the US, and that's either like very left wing or very right wing, right? And so there's this band Cockspar where that was like constantly kind of moving between those extremes, and I mean not Cockspar, Cockspar, yeah, but it was Screwdriver patches.
Screwdriver,
yeah.
Everybody would always be like the argument people would make was like, I'm just into the music.
Exactly. So that's what. So what Screwdriver was. It wasn't about that band.
That's like, you know,
they were like
you know?
Yeah. Well, they were just like the stand-in for that conversation, right? So people were trying to have that conversation of like, how much does it, you know, which is about the relationship of politics and the music. And my take on that, to go to your second question, Jason, is like, you know, there's a real difference that like, I think there's an antagonism between subculture and social movements, right? So like, you know, subculture, building a musical subculture is about saying we're different than society, right? And it's about creating a space of belonging and to signal like, I'm alienated by society, so we're going to create this other space over here where we can belong because we don't belong in some other kind of way. And social movements are almost the opposite. Social movements are saying, we actually need to lead society, so therefore we need to be a part of it. And that was the contradiction for me as a politicized young person who was in hardcore bands, in crust bands, in the punk scene, but also had these, was also a political organizer. At some point, I felt like I needed to choose between the politics that punk professed and the music in a way where, and what I mean by that is, choose between where I wanted to spend my time. Did I want to spend my time with kids who primarily wanted to hang out with each other and express themselves, which I loved and respected and still love and respect? Or did I want to primarily spend my time with people who are different than me, who wanted to bring new people into the movement? And I think it goes to this debate about this like policing of scenes, which is like, on one hand, in the broader society, I'm totally against the whole deplatforming thing. I think the impulse on the quote unquote woke left to try to like police people's language is bullshit. I think that like trying to say that like, oh, this speaker's coming to town, so we're going to shut down their platform to speak, I think that makes the situation worse. But I also think, and Jason, we were talking about this last night, like, in my own house, I'm going to keep a clean house. And so if I'm trying to build a subculture that's an alternative to society, all subcultures are literally a set of rules. They're spoken and unspoken social norms, how we treat each other, ways we signal to one another based on how we dress or how we talk or the music we listen to. We're creating a different world that has all of these codes to follow, right? And like, and so it's just a question of which codes do you want to create to follow. So like, if you're trying to create a scene, like I appreciated what you said earlier. I can't remember your name, and now I can't see you on screen. Paul, is that? Sorry. Yeah. Paul, when you were saying like, a lot of these scenes that are more inclusive, they had to actually build that. Like here in the Bay, Gilman Street had to actually literally lay out a set of rules in spray paint on the wall. And I think that's great if you want to do that. That's not the same thing as activism, though. And so, like, if you're trying to create, a certain cultural space, co-create whatever rules you want. But if you're trying to build a mass movement, that's a whole different thing. If you're trying to build a mass movement, you have to have a much broader open mind to people. The level of like policing of language and behavior needs to go out the window. You need to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. You need to make it inviting and stuff like that. And, I think there's also, to be honest, I also came out of a heavy music scene that didn't want to be popular. that didn't want to be mainstream. And it's only, you know, and I went through a period in my life where I stopped listening to heavy music. And then recently I've come back into it and realized, like, oh my God, there's like
people actually like it.
Yeah, it's popular.
It's so fucking weird, dude.
And it's so, but for me, that's like very exciting, you know, and because the way that the punk scene that I came out of was so self-limiting, it hated success, you know, and so the accusation of sellout was so arbitrarily used as one of those self-policing tools. And so to me, there's a real difference between, you know, subculture and movements. And I have a different response to, depending on, you know, what's the goal, which is why I both feel like, yeah, you know, punch that dude for wearing the patch and then have a good conversation about it and a lessons learned. And like, because people are working shit out because it's real, versus like, if you're an organizer trying to bring new people in,
yeah, you don't want to just sock them in the fucking jaw.
You know, yeah.
I mean, and I think that one of the sort of underlying components of that is that if you're talking about like the stuff that would happen at union level organizing, like the stuff that we do at like IWW meetings, or like, you know, things that we used to do in DSA and stuff like that. I mean, that's really the goal is really to look at, like you're talking about, Josh, the broader social context. And a lot of that's economic, you know, it's class oriented. We deal with sort of an intrinsic imposition of race on the context of class in the US, and because of the history here, and also the history that was imposed on us through just, you know, colonialism and the sort of creation of race as a construct in the first place, you know. So we all have to sort of like live through those contexts, and that's one thing. But I agree with you, Josh. I mean, the question here that we're really talking about is what do we want the world that we're building for ourselves, this little microcosm, to be, you know? And I think that's worth asking, you know? And I think that it's an active process, that it's a real-time process, you know, and that there isn't a fixed outcome. You know, it's like anything else. It could be, you know, if we allow it to be, it could just become something utterly different from what we thought it was to begin with, you know. And that's something that I've really like been wrestling with lately, is like, I personally, man, I don't want to be fucking associated with, you know, a context that doesn't represent who I think I am. And, you know, I mean, but I've shifted in my life away from just, you know, what I felt was a punk rock culture that became too rigid and too definition oriented, you know, and, you know, I've drifted to kind of trying to find, you know, a context that makes sense for me. And I guess I think I've arrived at this sort of, you know, realization that, I mean, we have to make it. We have to make that context. We're not going to be able to just find it, you know?
Yeah, that's right, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, Joshua, I really, it's funny what you're talking about with kind of the way the music scene sort of like can the gatekeeping is sort of inherent and can be okay in the right context, and how like in the broader political spectrum it's not, you know, it's not pragmatic to be that way. And it's interesting because I have a real weird experience with the music world, because I started out like a local scene guy in death metal bands and grindcore bands, and like, you know, it was like a real gatekeepy world. And when I moved out to LA, I was really looking for a band, and like it was really hard to find the right band because everyone was just so like locked into their scene, and I felt a little alien because I came from a world where like it was okay to be like in a grindcore band, but also like play thrash metal on the side or whatever. And like in LA, it was like very rigid and locked in. And you know, I ended up like sort of falling into like the new metal world, which Jason and I have a whole conversation about that to have, but but that sort of like morphed. And then like the most famous band I was in this moment, they're like a metalcore. Well, at the time they were like a metalcore band, but a very mainstream sounding band. But the thing I noticed about like that weird, that mainstream like band culture, not so much, I mean, the fans too, but really like in the band world was like, strangely, it was more diverse and more accepting, even though it was like so highly criticized, because we were playing with like a lot of people of color, like the God Forbid dudes were in our scene, and there were a lot of Hispanic bands, and there were all these bands that were represented like broader cultural kind of inclusion. And so when I look at sort of the democracy of music, it's like, you know, and I did eventually sort of go back into my niche music. Like I ended up being in heavier bands subsequently, but it was like, it's kind of weird because you can sort of look at politics in the same way, where like the mainstream bands like have the broader appeal, therefore like they kind of encompass some greater ideas. But I mean, a good example of a Bay Area guy who's like killing it right now is Rob Flynn from Machine Head and Violence. And in fact, you look at, I don't know if you guys saw, like Violence is like sort of together again.
Yeah, I saw that.
And they're not.
Sometimes they were practicing that sound wave.
Yeah, I don't know. They did a video, like this weird anti-mask COVID video recently.
Yeah, I saw that.
I don't know, man. But
yeah.
But long story short, like Rob is doing some good shit. Like he's using his platform to like really just like be very like progressive and like trying to like, but at the same time, like he's not holding like real radical ideals or anything, or like pushing anything that's crazy. Like the idea that like you're against Trump is not a radical idea, and the idea that you might do the pragmatic like fucking middle of the road voting is not a radical ideal. But at the same time, it's like he's got the platform to make those bigger ideas. And I know it's kind of a weird, like I'm getting into just random nonsense at this point, but this is all to say that I think that music does have that. And it's closer to the mainstream, but the problem is that like the subcultures are so resistant to it that it's really difficult to like sweep us all together into like one idea, or just like one, like even just a direction that we can all kind of push together. And so like it makes it hard to do shit like, push the Nazis out of black metal and push the fucking skinheads out of fucking bro metal. And it's like, dude, like we could all, like, we don't have to like the music, but we could all kind of see the value in each other's like roles as mouthpieces for broader social ideals. Right.
Well, that's why I think the new metal discussion is kind of when you broaden it. And the question I used to always ask people is, do you think the initial backlash of new metal with the white guys with braids and baggy clothes and the entrance of DJs on the scene, do you think the initial backlash of new metal had a racist undertone to it?
I think that is a super important thing to talk about, because like, I will not defend it as a music, because a lot of it is garbage, but if you look at the people who are at the front of when new metal blew up, like you've got a lot of people of color, you've got a lot of Hispanic people,
Sepultura,
you've got exactly,
Korn,
and like Deftones. I mean, that's a half Hispanic band, dude.
Yeah,
like and like
it's a fair point,
And the problem is I feel like there was such a missed opportunity in that period, because like so much of the underground was so like opposed to it, because like what it was doing, like the reason hip hop found its way into new metal is because like these guys came from that world. Like it's not like some white kid was like, I listened to fucking KRS-One and now I want to put that in metal. It's like the kids in that neighborhood wanted to do metal, but like what they knew wasn't fucking deicide, like they brought like their knowledge into it, and it became a little more hip hoppy and stuff. And there are bands that like pioneered that do, kind of go a little further back, like another Bay Area band, Faith No More. And and it's, but, and another inclusive band too. And it's just like, it's hard to, like, I get it. Like there's a lot of garbage in that genre, but culturally, like, that was a music that really did start like on the streets with like people of color, and their influence bled into it. And yes, some bands full of white people kind of got popular because of it, but there are still bands of color in that genre that have.
What we don't talk about from an artistic standpoint, though, is that's that meeting point, though, where the great part of hip hop, you have that 90s era of hip hop where we're sampling from some of the greatest drummers of all time, breakbeat wise.
Oh yeah.
Playing with these metal tones. So, and to Pascual's point, we all here agree a lot of that was dog shit. But some beastly drummers of color that played in that genre, that still play in that genre.
Hell yeah, man.
And we get System of a Down is a new metal band. And they talk real shit. I know Pascual's not a fan of Rage Against the Machine, but
and I don't dislike. I think Tom Morello is a wicked guitar player. I love his riffs. I they just don't hit me where I'm looking for.
Would you lump them in? Would you call them a new metal band though?
Yes,
I would.
I don't know if I really.
I'll call them a new metal band twice on Sunday.
New metal could not exist without Rage, though. That's
departing from the new metal debate, like, and sort of thinking too about the way that there can be this like a different perspective given to even black metal, for example. I mean, have you guys listened to Zeal and Ardor? Like,
yeah, oh yeah,
and so the also like Neckbeard Death Camp is another black metal band that's like overtly anti-fascist. Yeah. So there's like other ways that shit can play out. But Zeal and Ardor in particular is interesting. I mean, dude, Swiss American guy, black dude, in terms of how he presents,
Mm-hmm.
and like, it's a mixture of gospel and black metal. It's pretty rad,
Yeah.
But it's interesting to think about the way that, like, what you're talking about, Pascal, the way that there was this like visceral, angry reaction to new metal, that I do think really did. I think it's true that definitely. I mean, there's no question that I heard a bunch of people call new metal guys wiggers, and on a regular basis. People
have been calling people that forever, though. Like even long before that. Man.
But that was like their music. That was officially like wigger music. That was
sure. But growing up in the '80s, like and being around a lot of white people, I listen to hip hop. I listen to punk. I listen to mostly like Sonic Youth and Cabaret Voltaire, and I also listen to hip hop. Very, very much listen to hip hop throughout the mid into the late '80s, and I lived on an Air Force base or near an Air Force base, so kids are coming in from all over the country. All the kids that like hip hop were called that. That's where I first heard that term in 1985.
Right.
That's a dead word.
And I get it. I mean, I get how that could really come into play during the new metal scene, but I heard that.
That's a dead term now because white kids in hip hop is a thing. I can tell you now.
It almost got swallowed up.
All them little tattoos on their faces.
But hip hop almost had to go back underground again.
But in
order to re-legitimize itself?
No, I think that's part of it, but also like in the context of heavy music. So Pascal's talking about like the emergence of new metal. Sure. My little cousin is into fucking what's his name, Ghostman, And
I worked
so
with
that's
the
like
the
a
guitar
combination
players,
of like, it's like a mashup of like,
hip
it's a
hop,
mashup of like Lil Peep fucking mashup shit with mashing up with black metal, with trap, fucking,
They wear face
but
paint, right?
But let's face it. I mean, that is a really like, there isn't really a concern about the fucking, racial connotation of the music for kids of that generation, But I mean, and it's almost funny. There's this sort of like rebirth of nu metal.
There is.
Where it's like, it's more acceptable,
I shouldn't say it's huge
first time
again.
around.
I shouldn't say it's huge again because, again, without terrestrial radio, without MTV, everything is like this, right?
Yeah.
Those guys were playing arenas. These kids are playing 400 seaters if they're lucky.
People still make fun of Korn though, which, I mean, who wouldn't?
Them hoes play arenas.
Dude, I make fun of I make fun of them all the time.
I
would say the first Korn record, the producer was like, I just need that certain something. Hey, Fieldy, throw that bass down some stairs.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, it's the thing, like nu metal, like, I mean, I cannot, there's a lot of it I'm just not down with. But I think a lot of it came up, like, and I watched it because I was in it because the bands we were playing with were these bands. And like, like for instance, a band I play with a lot, still real good friends with, Spine Shank. So they're a band out of more or less Glendale. That band is basically Hispanic, Filipino, and Armenian, and what they brought to their band was like just a lot of their cultural experience and like what they were into growing up. And when you listen to the finished product, you hear a very like shiny nu metal thing that love or hate it. It is what it is, but that band, like, they didn't listen to Korn and then say they wanted to play Korn. They were just like, this is just how we want to play heavy music. But unfortunately, like that next wave, that sort of like 2000 to 2003 wave of nu metal got so overtaken by a lot of that kind of suburban, very white, like
Papa Roach kind of shit.
Yeah. And it's like Papa Roach and like, bands like Drowning Pool and stuff. And again, like, don't get me wrong, like that stuff, there's a lot of very overly simplistic riffing and it's just kind of cheesy and very predictable. But like at the same time, like I will always to my death defend the cultural relevance of it because it did come from something real and it did come from a scene that was like people just finding a voice. And I think it just got kind of corrupted by like the mainstream sort of pulling the worst out of it and propping it up. But
that's really interesting, dude. I haven't even really given a whole lot of thought.
Here's another.
But we've arrived at a point like we had that did happen and it had an impact and it's resulted in this in a different kind of context for people who are younger. And that like trend line that I was talking about earlier with like the ages of people who are Trump supporter type people, it peaks at people who are in their like late 40s through like their mid 50s. But people who are in their 20s and 30s, I mean, are the least likely people to support that dude, And so it's that happened. There was a lot of resistance to it, but it's possible that, that kind of, has had an impact that's been positive in terms of people being able to really think about just not giving a fuck as much about, like you guys were just saying. I mean, the word wigger, it doesn't even, people don't say that shit anymore.
No, it's deaded. It's deaded.
So, I mean, that's a fucking really positive thing in the larger social context.
You hear it.
The thing is, I still fucking hear that shit in our scene. You know?
Well, is it kind of like that show Cobra Kai? I don't know if you guys watched the Cobra Kai show where you have Johnny, the bad guy, quote unquote, from Karate Kid, that is learning how to be a decent human from his young Latin protege. Right? This young Latin kid is like, no, we don't say things are gay, sensei. That's a bad thing to say, and you don't call women chicks, sensei. You have to be, that's
is totally gay.
But here's another question for you guys when it comes to like people of color and access and music. Working at a studio where bands come in of all ages, it is really fun to see the young kids come in, right? The young kids that just got their new guitars and shit. When you hear these stories of these heroes, Jack White plays his guitar that he got from Sears. Eddie Van Halen got some Sears guitar first. Jimi Hendrix got a guitar from a pawn shop for $20. There's always a story of access to an instrument, and then they made the noise and they went with it. Instruments aren't easy to come by, and where I'm from, I don't even know where you get one because they don't really have music stores where I'm from. So either you're going to play drums in church because that's going to be your only access to music if you're a black kid, or shit, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to you. So how do we look at like access to even instruments to even play music? Like who gets to have the access? We cut these programs in a lot of these inner city schools that were music programs where kids could even just pick something up and learn how to play it.
Yeah, man, I was just watching a thing that it was like Duff McKagan and Jerry Cantrell playing like an acoustic song together for Jimmy Carter's birthday.
Yeah, that was
but
cool.
one of the things that was interesting is that while they were talking about it, they were talking about how Carter had funded. Like I was born in 1975. I barely remember Jimmy Carter. I was a little kid, you know. We had music programs though in my school. Mm-hmm. Like I remember that, and apparently the reason that was true is because there was a glut of funding that included money for what Duff, whatever his name is, was saying was that in his school they actually had like band practice rooms. Like the first band that he ever had, it was fully equipped with like Marshall amps and guitars and you know.
I went to the town I grew up in is a very economically oppressed town. Like there just weren't rich people when I was a kid, and I went to the worst school in that town in middle school. But we did have a music rehearsal performance space in the middle school.
Wow.
and very specifically was named after Jimmy Carter, and we they were like that was it, like whatever funding that had come down federally, because it wasn't state funded at that point, or at least whatever built my school, and it was like the worst goddamn fucking school, dude, but like we still had a room where kids could like jam and stuff, and like inexplicably had guitars and had drums and had all this shit. Wow. And it was just like I know that was like local funding. I mean, luckily I grew up in a town where also there's a lot of musicians, and so it was like amazing to see that, because like my school was just so bad in every other way, but like somehow we just had music space.
But think
it's
about
funny,
that. I'm sorry.
We've reached a point where I've always really been interested in the democratization of music, you know? So like, you know, I went to recording school, and when I first moved out here, I started working in recording studios, and I've worked in that like field, you know, for a long time. And it was really, really cost prohibitive. And there's a bunch of different stories about this that I tell people that are sort of like earmarks to like the way that the cost of doing it has just decreased a lot. Mm-hmm. But it's become accessible. So has distribution. Like anybody could distribute mm-hmm. their music with TuneCore. It doesn't, you don't have to have a record label anymore, you know?
You shouldn't.
Probably not, you know, but there are still, you know, gatekeepers to media and stuff like that. Anyway, it has become more democratic than it was, before. But conversely, access to instruments like we're talking about that stuff has become more challenging, more difficult, So there's stratification there. And so you have this sort of like outgrowth, this explosion and shit you can do on GarageBand with synths and fucking, electronic instruments and stuff like that,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of value in that shit, man. But it's like, if you're gonna play heavy music and you want to fucking pick up a guitar and learn how to play it, there is a cost barrier to that, man.
Go for it, Josh.
Yeah, it strikes me. So, not in regards to the democratization of instruments, but of platform and accessibility of getting your music out there. I'm curious if y'all have a perspective on the influence of if in the different heavy music scenes that y'all are connected to, if there's more access within the United States to international music. Like, it struck me even the way that Pascual, you mentioned Sepultura. Like, when I was coming up, one of the influences that built an anti-racist politic in the scenes that I was a part of was we just listened to a lot of music that was not from Europe or the United States. And so, like, we loved Japanese hardcore. And we loved, even a lot of us, actually, our entrance into heavy music was actually through the ska scene, in the way that when second wave ska came to the US in the 80s, and even before it kind of picked into kind of mainstream world, a lot of us who came into music through that way were like, oh, this is a Jamaican tradition. This is a tradition from Black folks in the UK, or like in the way that a lot of those scenes were really, really popular in Latin America, which was like gateway for us to listen to all of this like amazing punk from Mexico City and stuff like that. Or all of this like Indonesian hardcore stuff. And all of that really shaped our sense of like what belonged in heavy music, and I know that may not be the case for every subgenre, but my guess is that now with the proliferation of the internet and people's access to it, there's more than ever an opportunity for kids in the US to learn from music scenes that are non-European and non-North American. I'm curious if y'all have seen that or seen the consequence of that at all.
I can say that I grew up, obviously, in my household, listened to a lot of jazz. I had 5 kids in my family. My brother, who's the oldest, he liked Kiss. He liked Led Zeppelin. He liked all that. My sisters liked disco. My 2 oldest were in the disco. My youngest sister, the youngest girl in my family, listened to what was on the radio, and I listened to jazz like my dad. But growing up in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan, not many other people owned a jazz record or had access to it. It kind of goes back to something we were talking about earlier. And I'm sorry that I'm kind of going back on these things. I didn't get a chance to chisel in on some of these subjects. Is that music scenes are so regional, and I mean, at least being from a smaller area, not living in the Bay Area, I still think they are. I mean, I like kids that live in Marquette, Michigan, or Wausau, Wisconsin. Yeah, they might travel to other cities to play shows, but the farthest they're probably traveling, unless they're super ambitious, is within the state that they're in or the surrounding states. So music's still pretty regional if you're not from a populated area, which
I agree with that.
Say outside of Chicago. So my point, but going back to what Joshua was saying, is that I think you're right. I think you're 100% right. The more access people have to anything, no matter what it is, music, art, visual art, whatever, the more access all people have to it, the more likely they are to be. I'm keeping an eye on my dog who just had knee surgery over the weekend.
You and your old ass
Trying
dog.
to make sure.
Both of y'all old as hell.
She's 3. She blew a knee out already. Come here, Selena. Wow. Come on. But anyway, I think that obviously, if you have access to a world greater than your own, you're going to be able to accept that world. You know, you'll be more apt to do so. So yeah, I 100% agree that if schools and kids at a much younger age were exposed to more things, and I think music is one of the easiest ways to do that. We're more exposed. Yeah, that would absolutely contribute to an anti-racist
even
world in this country.
And even when I watch these things, I just discovered this this unsung shit. It's like it's like black behind the music.
Watch the unsung about the Silvers.
I've been falling down a rabbit hole about all this shit. I'm watching Unsung on DeBarge and all these black people.
Is good. Johnny Taylor's is really good. All right,
but if you watch it, they talk about like when these guys from back in the day came up, and a lot of these cats like, we got together in high school and we were in the high school band, and I'm like, you had instruments like that in your high school band? To what Pascual is saying, and when I see the kids come into the studio, sometimes I did see kids that were kind of mixed race kids putting bands together, but they always came from families that had some money.
Well, yeah, you had to. A lot of times, I remember there were we got recorders. Like we got like little flutes, but like if you wanted to play a real fucking instrument, you had to either buy it or your parents had to rent it to join band, you know. Yeah. But like there, from a cultural perspective, like to what Joshua was talking about, and the idea of sort of like the social impact of music that Pascal was talking about, you know. In terms of the construction of civilizations, if you're thinking about like non-European, like non sort of Western civilization oriented thinking about the development of complex societies, you know, Corral in Peru, which is like probably predates Mesopotamian emergence of civilized societies, was entirely, there was no war. It was entirely oriented around a party culture. And some of the things that have been found at that site, no weapons, but condor bone nose flutes, giant spoons that you'd use to just shovel cocaine into your nose, and huge vats to cook chicha, which is like a corn beer, you know? And like revelry, social context, music, those are the things, those are intrinsically human ways to be able to identify with each other. So the more opportunity we have to be able not just to experience each other remotely through a window, through a screen, but the more opportunity we have to be able to actually experience each other emotionally, you know, to really connect with each other. Mm-hmm. Those are I think that's true. That's a lot of it is breaking it down. It's funny though, because the converse of that is that the cultural context that we build can become othering, you know, so we can create these subcultures that are intentionally othering, you know, and that also can spread, you know, so it's complicated. But it's also simple. We have we can choose to celebrate the idea that we can experience all these different things together, or we can choose to really isolate ourselves. You know, I think we have to make a decision about what we're trying to do, you know.
I think you really summed up the contradiction, even in my own relationship to music scenes, of why I keep coming in and out of them and get disillusioned, but then get drawn back in because it's so compelling. It is exactly those contradictions. Yeah.
There's a dualism to everything that humans do. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, everything we commit genocide and we're altruistic, you know. I mean, everything that we do has this binary quality to it. But I think we can make decisions about that stuff. That's sort of the advantage. We have the capability to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate y'all for having me on. I do have to jump, but it's just fun to get to have a different conversation. So I'm just grateful to get to listen in and hear from y'all's perspective. So thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming through, Josh.
Yeah, appreciate you.
Thanks, man.
Good meeting you, man.
Yeah, till next time.
Peace.
Peace.
Later.
And on that note, it is getting late. And I know I'm talking to people in different time zones. It's late for John and Pascual. They got grown people jobs.
Hey, John, I really appreciate meeting you. I appreciate meeting you, Pascal. You guys are awesome.
Yes, nice meeting both.
Before everybody goes, can they say, I'll start with Pascual. Can you say what music projects you're working on and all that other good shit?
Yeah, so my active band is Devilsthrone. It's like a Black and Doom band. Yeah, just check us out. Look it up, Devilsthrone. Also, I do a podcast every week called Squaring the Strange. And it's kind of a skeptical podcast, so it's more about fun stuff like I don't know. This week we're doing music. I'm doing a whole skeptical take on a bunch of copyright cases. So those come out every other Thursday. And that's pretty much it for me. I'd be remiss not to mention my band Strangled by Strangulation, which is sort of a death metal supergroup. You'll find a lot of members from other death metal bands joining me on songs, and we put them out every once in a while. So, yep.
And John, oops, wrong button. John, before we go, is there anything you want to shout out that you're doing?
Not much, because it's pandemic. I do play in Conan Neutron, The Secret Friends. When there isn't a pandemic, I am the most of the time live drummer for that band. Also, playing in various projects. I can't keep my dog from jumping around. I also play in a few other projects. One that's called Threadmaker, which is a avant-garde improv post-rock band that has anywhere from 4 to 8 members. And we're on Facebook. There's recording there. We're on Bandcamp as well. Same with Conan Neutron, Secret Friends. And I'm also in a band called Lorena with in a new band, actually. I don't really know what it's going to be. I think it's going to be mostly hardcore. It's basically 3 members of a band called Dumpster Dick. I felt like one of the best hardcore bands in Madison. And all LGBTQ or all LGBTQ members. So I'll be the one straight dude, but I'm black, so at least that gives me some cred. Maybe that's why they love me. Also, that literally just started in the last month or so. So I have that as well. Other than that, just try not to get sick.
So you're still having band practice, John? Sorry, you're still having band practice, John?
No. Well, with Lorena, we were trying to plan one, but Wisconsin, we're number one in
fuck
in
that shit.
cases right now. So I
just can't have you sweat on me right now. I can't have you sweat on me right now.
Yeah,
you keep that sweat to yourself. I'm practicing in a hazmat suit. You lost your goddamn mind. You think you're gonna sweat on me? Band practice, schmactus.
It would be nice to practice. I would love to practice. Just
I
practice.
know. One of the greatest things I ever one of the greatest things I ever heard was wish in one hand, shit in the other, see which one feels like first. Because I am
My brother
not.
says that all the time.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I first heard that I lost my mind. I was like, that's the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. Paul, I know you
pretty
got
gross,
some because you know there's a person doing that right now as a Trump supporter. I wish Joe Biden would go away.
Just to see.
Paul, I know you got some irons in your proverbial music fire. What's going on with you?
High Tone Son of a Bitch is we're like getting some stuff ready for some like online show type festival things that are happening. There's one that was called Mutants of the Monster. It's like an Arkansas festival. So we're doing that one. That's in it's January 1st and 2nd, and it's moved to like an online format. So we're kind of working out live stream stuff. We're probably going to do that from up in Portland at a recording studio that's in a church called Hallowed Halls, where Billy Anderson, who plays bass for us, makes a bunch of records up there. And then I have relaunched my old record label with a tape series called Cassettes. Mm-hmm. Of a bunch of bands. So High Tone Son of a Bitch, that's retrospective of our of all the EPs that we put out. It's like a 2-tape thing on that label. And then Ales, who are fucking just awesome. Talking about sort of like inclusive black metal. It's a black metal band from Oakland that include, it's 2 women, ex Ludacra, just fucking awesome, like street sort of crusty black metal, Oakland black metal band. There's a band called Kavara who are from LA. It's ex Goat Snake and 16 dudes. Stanford Parker from Chicago produced that. Just fucking heavy. Reminds me of like Unsane meets Ministry meets Neurosis or something.
Interesting.
It's like sparse but just fucking heavy. And then this band Worshiper, who it's funny, we're on the same record, we're on the same label, like High Tone and this band Worshiper, in terms of our digital release and the CD for our band. But the guy John Brickhouse, who's the singer and rhythm guitar player and lead player, I should just say guitar player, from that band is from the same town that I'm from in Maine. He grew up like a few blocks away from me. He actually was the guy who recorded did the 4-track demo of like the first punk band I was ever in when I was like 14 or whatever.
Goddamn. And
so Worshiper is on TP. We're on TP, and then I put out this tape of their last release. He actually played like a guest guitar thing on our last EP too. So that's the shit I'm doing, is the label stuff and still just playing music, That's it.
All right. Well, before we go, I guess I can let you guys go. I can do the rest of the talking. You guys don't want to listen to me talk about books. Do you guys want to listen to me talk about books for 2 seconds? You don't give a shit. You don't give a shit. None of you hoes read. Illiterate hoes.
I got a bookshelf back here. The books I haven't read.
So whenever I see these podcasts, these shows, like even people that are on my show, but I do it where they can't see, audio only. Everyone has this bookshelf behind them with all these books, and I'm trying to figure out a way to get my bookshelf behind me so I can have my books. I was like, fuck it. You get the high chair, because that's how I live my life. I feed this little black ass kid here. But the book picks I have for people for this week that I think people should get, first and foremost, Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is a great book for anyone that's ever told you that socialism's killed 300 million people.
Yeah.
Give them this book, and it really puts into context things like the Soviet Union and China. And just basically what socialism is all about, which is not bigger, government control. Also, a woman that was on my show, a wonderful book called Prejudential by Margaret Kimberly. This book basically is about every president and the like she went through every fucking president and basically the history of race and presidents and kind of how every president has a shitty racial past. And to my earlier guest today, the makers of the Con, Eric Vaughan, Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz. This really breaks down the 2008 financial crisis, the subsequent foreclosure crisis, and does it with human stories of real people that actually got harmed by it. So you can really see what was done, because some people lost a little bit, but they didn't lose everything. And this really puts into perspective that the people that were a part of this, they didn't just make literally billions of dollars. They got positions in the government. You know, Donald Trump was literally a part of this. Steve Mnuchin, who is now the Treasury Secretary, was the big winner. So this is kind of, as we walk into 2020 and everyone is going, yay, Biden. And I do think Biden's going to win the election. Books like this are very important so we don't make these same mistakes again moving forward towards 2024.
Hey, Jason, on the book tip.
Yes.
It's interesting. My mom is part of a group called Indivisible that a lot of what they're, you know, pretty like liberal, kind of middle of the road type folks who send letters to their representative to ask them to please, you know, stop it, please help, you know. But she forwarded me an email that they had sent out, and some of those people are just, you know, they're genuinely concerned about social breakdown and, you know, the potential for, you know, what could happen if there's a contested election and stuff like that. So she asked me for a couple of books about what to do if that happens, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a couple of things that I would mention besides sort of the, like, you know, AK Press have a great book called Militant Anti-Fascism that's a history of confronting that kind of stuff on the street. Or there's another book called Fascism Today that AK Press also did. But I think separately, there are two things that I think are interesting for people to think about. There's this guy, John Curl, here in the Bay Area, who wrote a book that PM Press published called For All the People. Mm-hmm. And it's a history for folks who are less interested in sort of like theoretical discussion about this kind of stuff, but just like practical application. For All the People is a history of in the United States of collective and cooperative efforts that people have made. And it looks at why they have either succeeded or haven't. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important to think about. And then another book that I think is really great that people should, that has sort of application to the time we live in now, is a book called Ready for the Revolution. It's a collection of letters that folks in the CNT sort of administrative side and the defense committees were writing to each other during the Spanish Civil War. And that's a window to our to our modern moment. You know, how do we understand what the truth is, and what are the things that we're really trying to do, you know? And so anyway, those are also pretty cool, I think, you know.
Anybody else got a book recommendation? Your mic's out, Pascual.
Okay, sorry. I was going to hop in with a little Richard Wolff. He did a book, Understanding Marxism. That's really good too.
Yeah, that's a great book.
It's like that one was my introduction to him, and I really enjoyed it. I read it last year, so highly recommend his work.
Oh, I love Richard Wolff. John?
I'm illiterate. Yeah, I'm illiterate.
Paul,
A literate
Paul.
whore, I think you
got a
referred
podcast to pump or something.
Paul, what town in Maine are you from? Somebody's asking.
I was trying to write this guy back. I don't know how to do it. Maybe you can do it for me. I'm from. I grew up in Lewiston.
He says that's 30 minutes away from him.
Yeah. I grew up in Lewiston, Maine.
Yeah, that's Marcus from the. He's from another show that I am on from time to time, and sometimes they're on the show. They're pretty fucking rad. The Left Flank Vets, they're pretty dope. I lived in
Lewiston until I was like able to figure out how I could scam, steal, and borrow my way to live in Portland, which is, it's funny. It's like out there, it's 30 minutes. It's like a 30-minute drive, but coastal Maine's just like, it's a whole different world, you know. Central Maine, especially Lewiston, I mean, you're at the end. It's the end of Appalachia. It's really, you know, it's serious fucking poverty. And it's also like when I moved there, we moved there in 89, I guess. And the textile mills had started closing in the 70s, you know, like deindustrialization in America had really began in earnest in the 70s. So by the time we lived there, I mean, there was just nothing. I mean, there were no jobs, there were no factories, people had no fucking hope. It was really fucking grim. It was just crazy grim, dude. So you'd go to Portland and there would be people who had like Boston defense money who would, you know, it's an hour and a half drive from Boston. It's a commute, you know, but where we lived, it was just a little too far, you know? Mm-hmm. And so there was just nothing there, you know? Now it's all call banks, man. They make, Boston Brands has, hey, libs. Boston Brands makes Fireball whiskey there. And, you know, the only other stuff that's there is like TD Bank have a call center. Visa have a call center. When they were thinking about where to locate their call centers, the other choice was India. Like they're able to just pay people dirt fucking money and be, you know, 2 hours away from Boston, you know? So that's the kind of shit that people who live up there have always been fucking contending with, you know, somebody who's ringing a bell and telling them what to do. And otherwise they don't know what to fucking do. So
here's my next question to you guys. I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there any way I can get you guys to come back again and we have another discussion?
It's possible.
I'm down. I just got to have like a day heads up. I should be good.
Yeah.
I will get better with my heads up. And we won't go so late. Maybe we'll start earlier for you people that live so far away like John.
Yeah, no worries, man.
I'm fine.
All right, cheers, guys.
I'm fine.
Hey, have a good night, everybody. Thank you guys for watching the show. It's called This Is Revolution Podcast. Every Tuesday night, we do this wonderful live stream. Thank all my guests today. Eric Vaughan from the Kahn docuseries. Pascual, Joshua, Jonathan, Paul. I'm so happy to call you guys homies. So thank you guys very much, and I am out.